Yes, how you doing?
I'm good.
Michaela. Oh, we'll fix it.
It's a teeny tiny one, so we prepared an amendment, but I just want you to know, I read it.
All right. Council's back from its break. We are now all right. We'll move on now to items A, B, and C, which will be under final action and all relate to the integrated development ordinance. Therefore, they will be discussed together as was done at LUPS. We will start with council staff giving a brief introduction, followed by a presentation from the planning department.
Good evening, Mr. President and councillors. This is O1749 and R17213, the first of at least two hearings by the full council on the adopting ordinance and resolution for the proposed integrated development ordinance, commonly referred to as the IDO. The IDO was introduced to City Council on June 19th and has had 4 hearings with the Land Use Planning and Zoning Subcommittee of the Council. Through the Land Use Planning and Zoning process, 31 amendments to the IDO were passed.
Excuse me, Mr. President, can you have her bring the microphone a little bit closer? I'm not sure if the public can hear you.
I'm sorry. Tonight, councillors, we will have a presentation from Ms. Renz Whitmore with the Planning Department that will provide background and context on the IDO. This will be followed by public comment. There are several amendments proposed tonight. In addition to these amendments, staff will be seeking direction from the councillors for the preparation of any additional amendments before the next hearing of the IDO. And now over to Ms. Renz Whitmore for her presentation.
Thank you, councillors. My name is Michaela Renz Whitmore, and it's been my honor to be the project manager for ABC to Z, a project to update the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Comprehensive Plan and overhaul the city's 1970 zoning code to help implement that updated plan. As you know, the project began with a council resolution in 2014. Following kickoff meetings in February 2015, the team worked on both updating the comp plan, which you adopted in April of 2017, and drafting the integrated development ordinance over a full year, beginning in October 2015. We had multiple meetings throughout the city after each draft and took comments that were rolled into subsequent drafts. We also did more general outreach, going out into the community at various events to raise awareness of the project, and we sent a monthly newsletter to about 11,000 people. This effort includes 40 years of updates to our zoning code. While our zoning code has been amended hundreds of times since it was first adopted in the 1970s, this is the first comprehensive overhaul of our land use regulations. Because public meetings can only get into so much detail, we spent a lot of our time meeting one-on-one with neighborhood associations, in meetings in office hours, and through a series of zoning clinics where people could ask members of the project team their burning questions one-on-one. We also provided details and updates on the project website, including a zoning conversion map that compared existing and proposed zoning, and an interactive map illustrating the small area regulations that were being carried over from the sector development plans. The formal review and adoption process began almost a year ago in December 2016, when we submitted the draft to the Environmental Planning Commission, or EPC. After 5 public hearings, the EPC voted to recommend approval of the IDO with conditions that were incorporated into the draft that the Land Use Planning and Zoning Committee at the Council reviewed. LUPS held 4 hearings and approved committee amendments that are now part of the floor substitute that is before you. Zoning codes typically have a lifespan of about 20 years. We eked out 40 through a series of individual amendments for hot-button topics, as well as by adopting sector development plans that addressed individual issues in small areas. Today's system is illustrated by the picture on the left, which shows most, but actually not all, of the individual documents that include regulatory controls on land use. Each of these documents was drafted at a different time by different authors with a different purpose. Each has a unique organization. Many include both policies and regulations, and in many cases it is not clear which is which. Many of these plans overlap, which means that it takes 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, or in some unfortunate situations, 5 different documents to understand what should or can happen on an individual property. With over 60 sector development plans, over half of which are over 10 years old, it is impossible to update them all individually and keep them up to date, much less untangle the overlaps and conflicts that exist across multiple documents. ABC to Z proposes to replace this system with just 2 documents, the Albuquerque-Bernalillo Comp Plan and the Integrated Development Ordinance, or IDO. As a long-range policy document, the Comp Plan will be on a 5-year update cycle, and the IDO, as a regulatory document, will be updated on an annual schedule. In addition to sector plan regulations, the IDO integrates other standalone ordinances, overlay zones, and provisions in the development process manual that are actually zoning controls on private property. Consolidating the regulations into one document helps property owners see all of the rules that pertain to property in one place. Now that we have an updated vision of centers and corridors in the comp plan, other ranked plans are supposed to implement that vision, which is impossible without updating them all. The good news is that policies from the standalone plans have been incorporated in the updated comp plan already, and the sector plans themselves are included by reference in the appendix of the comp plan. The IDO now seeks to update the regulations from those sector plans and the zoning code to help implement the comp plan vision. The IDO incorporates special provisions for those centers and corridors prioritized for growth and development in the comp plan to encourage a walkable urban environment in those appropriate places while maintaining stability in established neighborhoods. The IDO helps implement the comp plan in 2 important ways. 1, the rules for the legislative zone change from one category of zones to another are different on the east and west sides of the Rio Grande. On the east side, for example, most commercial property converts to mixed-use zones that allow both residential and commercial development. On the west side, most C2 and C3 zones convert to a non-residential zone to ensure adequate land for jobs and services that are sorely needed. In areas where pedestrian-oriented development is desired, shopping center sites and premium transit station areas, C2 properties convert to the mixed-use medium-intensity zone to encourage walkable development near transit and near neighborhoods. 2, citywide, the IDO allows higher buildings by right in urban centers, main streets, and premium transit areas in exchange for higher building design standards that raise the bar on quality and ensure pedestrian and transit-oriented development in appropriate areas per the comp plan. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to align our vision, our zoning, and our process for future planning to ensure that all neighborhoods in the city receive the protections and the planning that only some enjoy today. The community planning area assessments, which will begin after the IDO is adopted, are the opportunity for all neighborhoods to assess how well the new comp plan and the new IDO are working for them and recommend changes to address challenges and opportunities in an ongoing 5-year cycle. This is a dramatically different system than we have today, where only half the city is covered by sector plans or overlay zones. The other half the city is regulated by a 1970s zoning code. When you look at a zoning map today, half the city is labeled SU2 or SU3, special use zones out of sector plans that total over 400 individual zones, each with different uses, different dimensional standards, and different review processes. SU1 zones make up a quarter of the city, and each is a unique site plan controlled zone. The city cannot successfully manage, administer, and enforce these 1,200 or more zones. The IDO replaces this system with 22 base zones and 20 overlay zones, all in one document. In this legislative process, we are converting zones based on permissive uses in the existing zones. We are not matching zoning to the land use on the ground. That is a much bigger and much more complicated process that is proposed to commence after the adoption of the IDO is adopted as a new toolbox. Resolution 17240, that's before you tonight, addresses that very necessary follow-up process for those zone changes. For this initial legislative process, we have created conversion rules for all the special use zones to ensure that existing entitlements are protected. Anytime a city adopts new zoning rules, existing development is likely to be out of compliance. In zoning speak, that development is non-conforming to the new rules. That does not mean it's illegal or that it needs to come into compliance. It means that existing development is allowed to continue, and the IDO sets out rules about what needs to come into compliance and when. The IDO includes many tools to tailor zoning to the diverse neighborhoods that make Albuquerque unique and vibrant. One of the powerful new tools is a range of R1 lot sizes and setbacks that better match the range of platting on the ground in Albuquerque, which, as you know, has developed over the last 300 years. In the existing zoning code, R1 is one size fits all. And because of that, there are at least 10 different versions of R1 adopted in different sector development plans because they don't fit that one size fits all zone. The IDO adopts that approach and creates 4 categories, or flavors, if you will, of R1 that have been assigned on the zoning conversion map based on existing lot size. All of these R1 flavors are describing a single-family home on a single-family lot. This land use makes up the vast majority of the land in Albuquerque. The RLT zone, which also allows a single-family home on a single lot, is also proposed to convert to R1 under the IDO. From a practical standpoint, you can see the benefit of this change on this zoning map. On the left, you see many different letters, all allowing single-family development, but it's hard to tell that just by looking. There's also no indication from those letters what densities or lot sizes are allowed. The map on the right shows clearly that all of these properties are allowing R1 development, and the flavors tell you the range of lot sizes allowed. This particularly helps in sector plan areas where SU2 only tells you to go look at the sector plan to figure out what's allowed. But it also helps in those areas currently zoned R1. The map on the right gives you much more information about what pattern of development is allowed in each R1 flavor. We all know that what makes Albuquerque unique is its diversity of people, of places, of character. The IDO attempts to strike a balance between providing tailoring for special places and neighborhoods to protect that character and providing citywide rules that can be applied consistently to protect all neighborhoods. The neighborhood edge is an important example. Although a similar provision exists in the zoning code for multifamily development next to single-family development, the IDO extends protections for single-family in low-density zones next to all more intense development within 100 feet of the property line. In addition, the IDO establishes rules for contextual infill development so that new lots have to be similar in size to adjacent lots. This extends similar rules from the downtown neighborhood area and the Los Terranes sector plans citywide. The project team reviewed each sector plan to identify these protections that should be extended citywide, or carried into the IDO as small area maps, or replaced with best practices for the 21st century, which was especially true of the older sector plans. The result is one document with small area protections in multiple sections where they can be found and used consistently over time and changed as needed through annual updates to the IDO. You can find these small area protections following the table of contents in the IDO and also on an interactive map on the project website. The IDO also makes many key improvements citywide. Perhaps most dramatically, the IDO establishes a contemporary system for which land uses are allowed in which zones. Much of the confusion and disagreement about how the city fails to enforce the rules on our books can be traced back to the pyramid structure in our 1970s zoning code, which refers to allowable uses in both higher and lower zones. The IDO replaces that pyramid structure with a use table, which categorizes uses in rows and zones in columns to note which uses are allowed in which zone. Use-specific standards provide additional requirements or allowances under special conditions for each use. Many of the small area provisions carried over from the sector plans are found in these sections. Here's an example of the clarity of the use table for what we call community residential programs in the existing zoning code. Here, you're looking at a condensed version of the table where you can see uses broken out by the individual uses, community residential facility, or group homes. They're also categorized by size. Small community residential facilities are allowed in the residential zones that allow low-density residential. Group homes are only allowed in the zones consistent with multifamily uses. Existing distance separations for group homes are carried over as use-specific standards. The existing zoning code does not distinguish protected classes of people established by the Federal Fair Housing Act, which prohibits discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, or familial status. The IDO breaks out the federally protected classes as community residential facilities. Allowed everywhere, similar residential uses are allowed per the Fair Housing Act. The IDO also reduces the size of the small facilities to 8 occupants from 10 in the existing zoning code. Other key use-specific standards include distance separations between uses carried over from the existing zoning code or sector plans and made citywide. The IDO creates a new distance separation between heavy and special manufacturing and residential uses, which responds to requests from the San Jose neighborhood, but which would also protect all neighborhoods near these industrial activities. The use-specific standards also include new restrictions on uses near major public open space citywide to ensure compatible development near this public investment. The IDO also creates a new requirement that sites 5 acres or more adjacent to major public open space in any zone must go get a site plan reviewed by the Environmental Planning Commission before subdividing or developing. In general, the IDO makes development standards more objective and more predictable, raising the bar on quality citywide. This allows more review by staff and by the Development Review Board, which is made up of staff of multiple departments and agencies, which generally streamlines the development process. Zone changes and policy decisions are still clearly in the purview of the Planning Commission and the City Council. The IDO sets out in table form all the development review processes, what notice is required for each, and the decision-making body who can actually decide. It's actually not very well known that under today's system, development in base zones from the zoning code goes straight to building permit with no notice required at all, with very few exceptions. Under the IDO, notice is required by email to recognized neighborhood associations for all site plans. The IDO also includes a new requirement that applicants must meet with recognized neighborhood associations before submitting applications to the city for medium and large-scale projects. It is also not very well understood that today the EPC can make the final decision on all zone change requests except for those in sector plan areas, in which case City Council gets to make the final decision for requests over 10 acres. The IDO strikes a balance between these two by allowing the EPC to make the final decision on zone change requests under 10 acres in areas of consistency, shown here in yellow, and under 20 acres in areas of change, shown here in dark orange, with council making the final decision after those thresholds. The biggest improvement the IDO makes in terms of appeals is to make standards clearer and to bring them all into one regulatory document. Beyond that, the IDO eliminates the Board of Appeals, which hears appeals of decisions by the Zoning Hearing Examiner, or ZHE, in order to get all appeals heard by the ultimate land use and planning authority, City Council, a little faster. The standing for appeals is also simplified and clarified in the IDO. Under today's system, the standing for appeals depends on what type of appeal. Property owners within 100 feet for appeals of ZHE decisions, but 300 feet for decisions by the DRB, EPC, LUCC, or the Board of Appeals. Recognized neighborhood associations within 100 feet for the ZHE, but within 600 feet for other appeals. Instead, the IDO makes standing consistent with the notice requirements set by the Neighborhood Recognition Ordinance, and for property owners within 100 feet, consistent with state requirements for zone changes. Any individual that can show special and adverse impact, language adopted from state case law to clarify existing criteria from the zoning code, can also appeal any final decision. The hard work doesn't end with the adoption of the IDO, for better or for worse. In many ways, the IDO is just the beginning. The IDO doesn't take effect for 6 months after adoption. Within that time, we will train staff and hold citizens academies to train the public and developers on the new system. Any mistakes or omissions we find, we'll bring back through the review and approval process within that 6 months. Within a year of the IDO becoming effective, the Planning Department will submit a series of zone changes to address existing mismatches of land use and zoning, and to correct zoning for uses made nonconforming by the IDO. Within 2 years of the IDO becoming effective, the Planning Department will embark on the community planning area assessments to test how well new policies and regulations are working and generate recommendations for changes. Property owners interested in zone change requests can sign up now on the zoning conversion map. This process will address many of the requests for different zoning conversions that we can't accommodate in this first legislative action to establish new zones and a new IDO. Staff will spend 3 to 4 months in each of the city's 12 community planning area assessments over 4 years, with the 5th year dedicated to rolling up all the recommendations for policy changes into the 5-year update of the comp plan. The planning system established in the IDO requires that recommendations for regulatory changes from those assessments be brought forward during each of the yearly updates of the IDO. I've spoken too long and probably spoke too fast, but I wanted to thank you for this important opportunity to provide the full scope of the improvements that are intended with the IDO. I'm happy to address any additional questions that you have at this time.
Any questions for Michaela, councilors? We do have a number of people signed up for public comment. If there are no questions at this time from council, we'll get started and we'll name, as with general public comment, we'll call out the first 3 names, the next 3 names, and please come down and grab a seat where you're near the front and you can speak when your name is called. So the first 3 speakers are Stephanie Landry, followed by Robert Nelson, followed by E. Ward.
My name is Stephanie Landry. I'm from the Landry and Ludwig Law Firm. In this instance, I represent Robert Karp and his trust as trustee. And I wanted to take the IDO from really the broad to the very specific in this case. My client just found out with respect to the IDO that there would be a zoning change or proposed zoning change with respect to his property. He lives in Florida, so he's not here in New Mexico. This issue of notice, of course, is important to him. Had he known that before, he would have been involved in connection with the LUPZ hearings. But I'm here today to make a record with respect to his objection to what would constitute a rezoning of his property based on the zone plan amendment. And I wanted to note that his property is in the downtown area. It's currently in the sawmill area. It's shown by the red outline block. He is currently zoned, his property is currently zoned the Sawmill R, which allows for townhouses. And the recommendation, at least with respect to the zoning map, is that it would be R1, and that would eliminate the the townhome zoning. He has his property for sale. This is of significant importance to him because it will impact with respect to the sale of his property. Right next to his property is the industrial area. I believe it's a light industrial area. This shows his property and the beginning of the industrial area right behind it. So he does not have R1 behind him. Instead, it's directly a light industrial area. The townhouse zoning should remain. There's no conditions changed with respect to that.
Thank you, Ms.
And this again, just to show, this
Okay,
is the,
just a minute, please.
Yes.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ma'am, if you would talk to one of our staff down here, rather than, we can't do anything from this, but if you'll talk to our staff, they'll work with you and see if there's something we can do to help with this.
and I intend to do so. But
Thank you.
I did recognize that this was one of the
Thank
last
you.
meetings, and he just found out about it.
If you will talk with them, we'll try to help.
Thank you.
Thank you. And ma'am, we don't have to have this meeting to try to help. You can talk to them privately. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker is Robert Nelson, followed by Ms. Ward, and then Bianca Encinias.
Good evening again. Thank you, councilors and Council President Isaac Ben, for the opportunity to speak tonight. Earlier, I mentioned some statistics and in an equitable process. I would like to conclude with some recommendations that the Historical Neighborhood Alliance would like to inure the council with, or just for future leanings. So, the HNA recommends the following proactive solutions and steps to reconcile this inequitable process by deferring the proposed City of Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Comprehensive Plan and IDO. Actually, excuse me, the IDO and the proposed for at least 14 to 16 months. Equity not only as a goal of the comprehensive plan and IDO, but as a process as well, authentically engaging and empowering neighborhoods with inclusive public participation. Sector plans shall remain in effect until community planning assessments are completed through a meaningful neighborhood-based process representing diverse stakeholders. The Citizens Academy should be renamed Neighborhoods Academy and should be conducted as a part of the community planning assessment by local experts before the planning is approved, providing an educational outreach for neighborhoods to understand the history of zoning and community development through an equity paradigm. Community-based development according to sector development plans is equitable tools, meaning participation, input, and legal standing for communities to engage in the development and protection of their neighborhoods. Members of City Council, Bernalillo County Commission, the Mayor of Albuquerque, and the incoming Mayor of Albuquerque, and the Albuquerque Planning Department participate in undoing racism training specific to the history of land use and zoning in the Southwest, specific to the history of New Mexico. I just want to say thank you again for your time tonight, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Ward, followed by Ms. Encinias, followed by Loretta Naranjo Lopez.
Is the focus here?
President Benton and councilors. Earlier this year, I presented information that gave concern about preferential input toward the development community over neighborhoods, and we presented numbers regarding that. Here is an email chain showing that the president of NAIOP requested a presentation from Mr. Elliott, the contractor, with Clarion for his audience of developers, consultants, bakers, contractors, etc. And city staff, planning staff responded or intervened that they think it would be best for urban development and design staff to present to the group to avoid future accusations of giving NAIOP special consideration for the ABZ project. And they may need to offer on the website or Bookface page opportunity for a presentation by staff to any, well, mostly group that requests it. And fast forward to, or later, well, earlier this year from now, but later from then, there was an instance where a member of NAIOP submitted comments to the EPC that were not included in a particular folder. And the senior project manager wanted to forward the one with the document that the EPC voted to accept, even though it wasn't included. And compare that with when I wrote a letter on behalf of our neighborhood association, meeting all the deadlines to be able to receive written comment and written response, and for me to comment, that I was denied that opportunity because they missed my letter, but there was no accommodation made for the neighborhood. So I think we continue to see that there are concerns about preferential treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Encinias. Let's see her. Ms. Naranjo Lopez, then Eleanor Walther, and then Nick.
Good evening, President and councilors. My name is Loretta Naranjo Lopez. And the very first meeting I attended in regards to the Integrated Development Ordinance, according to the planning staff, they stated that our sector plan would be transferred. The R1 zone, which is in the R2 zone, which is part of our property that's zoned R2, was not transferred, nor was it implemented. And the zoning categories were reduced from 24 zones categories to 20 categories. This reduction also reduced our property rights and our public process, and will reduce our quality of life. The character protection overlay was not transferred over. Our design criteria was just discussed 2 Fridays ago, and we still haven't received the complete document. As a professional planner, the Integrated Development Ordinance is far from being accepted as a document that used participatory methods, that is transparent and inclusive, and is far from being considered to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the community. The change that the associations would like to have in our neighborhood is to have a family-friendly neighborhood where the air we breathe is clean, and our families have single-family dwellings with room for the children to play, and crime, sanitation, and traffic concerns are dealt with immediately, so we do not have to face fatalities. I thank you for this opportunity, and I ask that you listen to this Dark Neighborhood Alliance, that you really deal with the environmental impacts of San Jose, and you deal with that our communities should have the same protection as the historic overlay zones have.
Thank you. Next is Eleanor Walther, followed by Nick, and then David Ring.
My name is Eleanor Walther, and I'm president of the Rio Grande Boulevard Neighborhood Association. My first comment is about Amendment X. Usable space definition currently includes balconies and rooftops to be counted in the required usable space. While this may be appropriate in an urban setting, it does not seem appropriate for the rural setting. The IDO tries to make definitions that encompass the whole city without regard to existing neighborhood characters. This is an example of one size fits all. We request that balconies and rooftop open spaces be removed from usable space in the rural sections of the city. The current version of the IDO only requires 1 acre sites for cottage cluster development. The current North Valley area plan requires 2 acres. We request that the requirement be returned to 2 acres to preserve our open land and densities for existing neighborhoods. Please let us have a say in the character of the North Valley. If the requirement is not changed to 2 acres, we would like you to consider changing cottage cluster development to conditional use. The current IDO only requires 1 parking spot per dwelling unit. These developments may be on lots that have no street parking and little front lot footage on existing streets. Thus, the new requirement does not allow for visitor parking or dwelling units that may have an additional vehicle. We request that more than 1 parking spot per unit be required. We request that a copy of the IDO with the amendments be integrated into the text with the changes highlighted so the changes can be tracked. The amendments are appended to the document, making it difficult to know what is the most recent regulation. We support the West Side Coalition of Neighbors and the Taylor Ranch Neighborhood Association's objection to the change 6-4-U-2-A.
Thank you. Nick, followed by David Ring, and then Karen Cathy.
Council President, councilors, I am pleased to address the entire City Council tonight. I am the leader of Semillas y Raíces, a new group which counts 60-plus supporters in the very divided Santa Barbara Martineztown neighborhood. Although both groups share 2 similar goals, keeping for our small neighborhood its residential and family feel and respecting its historical place in Albuquerque, the division occurred on the implementation concept. After much research and work with the city's planning department, we are in support of the IDO, its recent amendments, especially the CPO, its prompt approval, and its continued review process. I once again volunteer our neighborhood to be first in line for the future community assessment program so that we can, as a team of residents, business owners, and varied professionals, address our issues of poverty, illiteracy, addiction, lack of city resources, and integrate those necessary improvements for the betterment of our community and its current residents. This new ordinance will help our community with enforceable regulations garnered from all zoning plans across the city. Ours only protects us from having paid parking lots. Future protections include keeping our small streets a reminder of our old farming paths and agricultural past, building heights not to exceed 2 stories, allowing us to keep our residential look and atmosphere, allowing for a rich variety of in-home and small businesses, a long-standing tradition for our village within a city, frontier wall heights of up to 4.5 feet, allowing privacy and safety for residents and police officers, continuing to allow our property owners to build what are now called mother-in-laws, a visible distinction of many of our multifamily lots, allowing for 5 years before losing our grandmothered in-land use rights. After we stop working, we should have a longer delay before selling our retirement investment. And finally, allowing interested property owners for free to match their land use with residential zoning code by legislative action. Thank you all for your commitment to our city and our county.
Thank you. Next is David Ring, followed by Karen Cathy, and then Barbara Grothus.
Mr. President, esteemed members of the City Council, my name is David Ring.
I'm supposed to go before.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought.
Mr. Ring was next.
Okay, I'm sorry. It sounded like you.
Mr. Ring,
yeah,
and then,
okay.
are
Yeah,
you Karen?
I'm sorry.
You'll be next.
Sorry for the confusion. Mr. President, members of the City Council, my name is David Ring. I'm the president of the Bear Canyon Neighborhood Association. And in general, the Bear Canyon NA supports the Integrated Development Ordinance and its attempt to modernize and encourage smart development. It especially appreciates the efforts of City Planning Director and Bear Canyon resident, Susie Lubar, as well as the substantial efforts of Ms. Renz Whitmore. However, we caught a mistake late in the game just last week about CRPs. And and we believe that, you know, the IDO's proposed bifurcation of the existing definition of community residential programs by purported fair housing protected class versus not protected class, as well as the elimination of the 1,500-foot land use separation requirement between CRP facilities, is a mistake of law. We brought this up with city planning, who basically is relying on the developer, Mr. Elliott and Clarion. And his response to them, which I never got to talk to him directly, was that it violates the separation rule violates the FHAA, which is the Fair Housing Act amendments of 1988, and cases thereunder, but no one's ever said why. So my presentation is a little different than what I would have given a few minutes ago. We're going to talk with your council, Melendrez. We're going to talk to some of you later, but we have real-world examples of why this is a bad idea, why it doesn't violate the law, and I think we can convince you. So thank you so much for your time today.
There's a question from
Thank
Vice
you. I don't have
President
a
Winter.
question, but I absolutely agree, and there's an issue here, and as long as I've been a counselor, it hasn't been the way that it is proposed now in the IDO, and I guess I'm also being told that it's proposed that way because of federal law, and I think we got to make sure we clarify it, because I think if it's changed, it's going to create problems for everybody and everybody's district in the city, so we will clarify that, and I think that's a discussion we will be having. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kathy, then Barbara Grothus, then Renee Horvath.
Good evening, City Council. Good evening, Pat Davis. He represents the International District. Thank you. So my name is Karen Cathay. I don't know if you knew, but it's French.
Okay.
And so what I'm talking on is Amendment C, neighborhood meetings. I'm a South San Pedro Neighborhood Association member. I've been a board member. I've been the vice president, and I've been the secretary. Neighborhood associations are key to getting people involved in getting true information from their neighbors and need a say for their place of living. We are constituents of your districts, and we vote you in. We are a part of the process, not just a charrette, because I know many charrettes have come through the International District, and I don't want it to just be, oh, look, we have this beautiful idea, and we're going to pretend we're going to listen to you. We do need to have a voice, and please remember, last time I came here, I talked about compassion, and I also talk about being equitable across the city. We all live in this city, all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cathay. Councilor Davis.
Ms. Cafe, really quickly, if she's back. To clarify, on the amendment, have you seen the additions that are recommended or proposed by Councilor Gibson that would add an option for the neighborhood associations to request additional meetings? And
I haven't,
okay.
I also was noticing that the IDO had mentioned that it would just be internet, and not everybody uses email.
Right. Right. We're going to take a look at that amendment shortly, and I think we ought to have that conversation. Thank you so much.
Good
Ms.
evening,
Grothus.
councilors. We do appreciate the moments that we're given to express ourselves here. I think it's been pretty clear consistently that NAIOP, the other developer associations, individual developers, and all of those people have been very supportive of the IDO. We just had an election. We just talked about who the real Democrats are. We just talked about how much we love to have our community meetings and how happy we are for our pathetic voter turnout that was higher than other times and all of that kind of stuff. Why do people quit participating? Because we come here, we talk, and we are not heard. Who is happy with the IDO is largely the development community. It is called the Integrated Development Ordinance, and it doesn't really talk about how the people, the voters, the citizens, the neighbors are going to be incorporated into the development process. I think we've had a lot of happy chatter about how much better this is, but I just want to say, Clarissa, Mr. Davis, Mr. Benton, Ms. Pena, I should have said, Ms. Gibson, and Mr. Sanchez, I think of you as people who care about our community, but I don't believe in it anymore. I'm very sorry to say it, but I really think we have lost our democracy. We just want the votes. Once you've given us, once we've given you our votes, we get nothing back. And I'm not saying nothing ever at all. I appreciate some of the things Mr. Benton has done for our neighborhood. But look at the project at 10th and Central and tell me if that is a quality building. It's been there for 4 years. The plaster's already, the stucco buckling up off the surface. What are we living in? You are dumping these things in our neighborhoods and talking about all the happiness that it's going to bring. And I would just like to say, I don't think you're hearing from the people the happiness. Who you're hearing the happiness from is the developers, and I'm asking all of you, oh, Ms. Jones, oh, I just can't tolerate
Mr. President, what's the time limit on these?
Thank you. Next is Renee Horvath, followed by Arlette Miller and Willa Pilar.
Good evening. My name is Renee Horvath from the Taylor Ranch Neighborhood Association. We did submit a lot of amendments recently, and I'm listening to what Michaela was saying. I can see a lot of them still have not been addressed. And so tonight I was actually going to focus more on the density question because that is a big concern. And when you look at density, there are traffic issues that go with that. Overcrowded schools like we do have on the west side. We don't have a grid system to handle a lot of density. We don't have access. We're trying to preserve natural features. So all this comes into play when it comes into density. And I know it's just not the west side, but other areas of town as well. And when I look at these amendments, Amendment 11 is removing all density maximums. And without mentioning all these other considerations when you add more density. In addition, I've always heard that if you increase density, there should be a public benefit that goes with it. You just don't increase it, you have to provide a public benefit. Also, Amendment V is reducing usable open space by 50%. And when on the west side, our apartments have a usable open space. But if they do reduce it, they replace it with a public benefit like open space or parks. So you should not be reducing the usable open space or increasing the density, because this just really reduces the quality of life overall for the city. And sector plans, we should not replace them. The overlay zones are not strong enough to replace these sector plans. And I have a lot more to say, but that's a few of the items I want to address. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Arlette Miller, followed by Willa Pilar, and then Ben.
First of all, I want to say I totally agree with the last two speakers. The top-down arrogance of this process so far when these guys started talking about this at the neighborhoods was pretty insulting. It's our city, and we deserve a strong voice in it here in the neighborhoods and in its future. You know, if the buildings are too tall and there's too much density and inadequate setbacks and not enough open space, the city's going to lose its unique character. And you know, its uniqueness is one of the things that kept us living here for 33 years. And we just see more and more traffic that hasn't been well planned for. They have density of use without the traffic being adjusted to handle that, the roads and access. It just isn't working very well now. And you guys, it sounds to me like you may be making it a little bit worse. So just slow down, delay the approval until a lot of these issues that have been brought up this evening have been adequately addressed. And then you might have a really good plan. Some of these things are good, but a lot of it isn't, and we don't trust the process. Sorry about that, but thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Pilar, followed by Benjamin Trujillo, followed by Elizabeth Venzel.
From small citizens to tall citizens. Can you hear me okay? Okay, hi, I'm Willa Pilar. I just want to add my voice to the chorus of people who seem to be asking to just slow down the process. I've tried understanding the IDO. I felt very stupid, and I'm not a stupid woman, but it's a fairly complex document, so I've been looking for help to understand it. My neighborhood association doesn't even meet till tomorrow. Perhaps we'll get a little insight there. You know, one of the reasons I came tonight was to get educated a little better, and I'm glad to hear what people have to say. I agree that the only people who seem to be really for the IDO are paid to be so. It's rare to find kind of regular people expressing support for it. And at this point, I still don't understand it well enough. I'm afraid of the divisions that it seems to be causing, that some people seem to think they're going to have to go without, or there still seems to be disparity. I am glad the presentation showed that the Board of Appeals might go away. For me, that sounds like something's being taken from me that might protect me. I recently had an experience with the Board of Appeals, which was very helpful. So if this is truly going to benefit me and not just developers, I'm not convinced yet. There's got to be more done to convince me that this IDO is better for Albuquerque. So please give us a little more time. Thank you.
Next is Mr. Trujillo, followed by Ms. Venzel, followed by Mary Ann Barlow.
Good evening, councilors. My name is Benjamin Trujillo. I'm both a homeowner and a business owner in Albuquerque, and I'm here tonight to, as many people have said, request that you defer a vote on the IDO for the many reasons that have been enumerated. I certainly can appreciate the work that goes into trying to streamline a huge load of disparate code documents. However, it does seem, from what I've heard and what I feel, that at a minimum, there is still not sufficient understanding for those of us in the public for what this IDO means for us, the people that live in this city. That's my request. Thank you.
Ms. Venzel, followed by Ms. Barlow, and then Peggy Norton.
Good evening. My name is Elizabeth Stacy Venzel. I'm a member of the Highland Business and Neighborhood Association.
Excuse me, could you bring your mic over?
The Southeast Heights Neighborhood Association, and I'm a supporter of the Historic Neighborhood Alliance. I am a property owner on the Highland, in the Highland area right on Central. And we were recently declared to be the #1 crime area in Albuquerque. Myself and other property owners are forming a group. We have not finally decided a name, but we are all property business owners along Central there. Our primary purpose is to help fight the crime in the area and also to improve healthy commercial development in our area. We want to revitalize it as a commercial area. I'm very concerned with the rezoning that's proposed in my specific area, the height restrictions to allow multi-unit social housing to be built on the street. That is not part of the sector plan. It is not conducive to commercial development. One of the things that the I-Team, which is the declarer of our #1 crime area, has taught me, I've met with the director of the I-Team and some of the consultants, and he said the primary area, we are joined in that #1 designation by the International District. One of the primary factors in our area is crime, and it emanates from apartments. People live in apartments in our area and commit crime throughout the city and come back to our area. So my question is, why are we talking about putting more apartments on Central? I have written a letter around midnight, it got sent out last night, addressing LUP's D amendment and Amendment Q, but I was focusing on Amendment D. My neighbors joined in and wanted to support my letter, and so I
Thank you,
have
Ms.
another letter here from the business
Thank you. Your
group.
time is up.
I know. I was interrupted, though.
Councilor Lewis.
Yeah, a quick question. You sent an email to all the councilors you met last night?
Yes, sir.
Regarding the issue? Okay.
Yes, sir, and Crystal Ortega distributed it for me, and then I have extra copies, and this Highland business letter duplicates what I had written, supported by my business group. There are 16 signers who I personally spoke to today within a 3-hour period who wanted to put their names on. There are over 40 people in the group, and I will get more names in the next couple of days.
Anything you have, if you certainly get us copies of that, I'm certainly interested in talking with you more about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
Next is Mary Ann Barlow, followed by Peggy Norton, and then Kathy Adams.
Thank you, councilors, for letting me speak. My name is Mary Ann Barlow. I'm a member of the La Luz Landowners Association over on the west side, and I'm afraid I'm going to be a bit of an echo here. La Luz and the Taylor Ranch Association and the West Side Coalition are here to support all of those who are requesting more time to review, assess, and publicize this enormous plan, which will really affect us all. This IDO, when it's put in motion, will make a big difference to all of our neighborhoods. Our neighborhoods will be using much of our voice and ability to appeal under this new plan. Many of us have worked for years in our neighborhoods to assure the livability, the character, and the density, all of the things that make our neighborhood livable are protected. And our sector plan so far has done that. We live very close to the river, which is a very important environmental part of Albuquerque, and we hate to see this turned into just some other kind of metropolitan neighborhood, which some of this plan seems to be indicating. And we also resent the attempt to rush this through before a new administration comes in. We want the chance for our voice to be heard and our neighborhoods to be protected. And we just ask more time and maybe some new eyes to look at this. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Peggy Norton, followed by Kathy Adams, and then Janice Arnold-Jones. Ms. Adams?
I guess it's me, right?
Yes.
I don't want more time. I want a different process. In an article in the Albuquerque Journal on October 12th, Councillor Jones was quoted. She said, "I think we're voted. We're vetted. LUPS was vetted. And it's time for the full council to weigh in." Well, I submit that some specific interest groups may be part of that we, but councillors, that we does not include us. It does not include us. The majority of Albuquerque has not been included. They have been underinformed. We have been publicized to the max, but we have not received hardcore information. It could be said that the IDO may be the best kept secret in all of Albuquerque. Pass it now, look at it later. Yes, the city planners have worked hard, but that does not make it right or ready. We can commend their expertise, but we can still express our significant concern that they've worked in a vacuum. I contend that this has been and is a flawed process. You have not truly engaged public task forces or study groups. You have not made a real attempt to bring together people from different neighborhood associations to discuss, to compare, to contrast, to learn from each other and with each other. There has been no real opportunity for us to make significant contributions. You have a chance to make it right. You have a chance to make it not a cookie cutter, but cutting edge, a tailor-made plan for Albuquerque. These are not words. These are people's lives, businesses, and properties.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Arnold Jones, followed by Peggy Neff. Good evening.
Councilors, it's nice to see you. I am here on a specific issue, but I just want to caution you that when we have kind of an outcry, especially from one sector of the town, about an issue, especially regarding height, I know that you will use your wisdom and make sure that they are heard. I want to talk about group homes. We have actually, with the help of David Ring and Elizabeth Venzel, actually drafted an amendment. I think there was a small oversight, or maybe the way that the words fell. It eliminated part of the 1,500-foot division between group homes. I say this because we have a problem, and this problem has been getting worse since 2002, and now we have companies coming in from Arizona, from Florida, and now from California. They're sliding under the radar as a rental, and what is happening is our neighborhoods are becoming strip mall neighborhoods. Too many businesses in a neighborhood ruins the actual tenor and character of a neighborhood, but it also compromises the health and safety of those very individuals who are supposed to be served by these entities. So I encourage you, please, to revisit this 1,500-foot separation for the sake of the neighborhoods. Don't stop there. We have got to deal with this issue, and I thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Peggy Neff, followed by John Salazar.
Council President Benton, councilors, thank you for having public comment on this debate. I first and foremost want to thank you for supporting and promoting the endeavor for a full comprehensive review and overhaul of our city's zoning ordinances. It's a Herculean effort. I've been part of the city for the last 12 years, and I've stood before you on many issues regarding zoner. Councilman Winter will attest to that. Yes, I want to urge support for the amendments in front of you, of course, with considerations given to the points raised by people who have come forward this evening, and also you've heard that there are mistakes and there are issues that have not been addressed. I want to urge and I want to ask you to support the deferment of this document through the new administration. I think more time given to the communities is never a problem and should never be addressed as one. I think that, in fact, someone should propose that the neighborhood associations that are registered should be involved in this to the point that 90% of them agree. Wouldn't it be great, instead of developers coming up here, community groups came up here and said, I support this. I've been involved in this. I really like what you're doing here. I think that the community participation in this effort is much greater than it has ever been before for any other policy changes for Albuquerque. But you need to address it as a way to go forward. 25%, 50%, 75%, whatever it needs to be.
Thank you, Ms. Neff. Oh, I'm sorry.
As you can see, I don't think public comment period is sufficient for this dialogue. And I think you've heard that tonight from all of the community groups that have come out here.
Thank you. Next is John Salazar.
Thank you, President Benton and members of the council. My name is John Salazar with the Rohde Law Firm, and I'd just like to commend the city, the entire city, for taking on this substantial but necessary project and process. It's not surprising that issues have come up, given the complexity of the undertaking. However, it has been very reassuring to work with city staff, which has been responsive to addressing unintended consequences. And I would like to especially commend the city planning staff, the city council staff, and the LUPS committee. which held several hearings on this matter, taking a lot of input before moving the matter on to full council after having adopted many appropriate amendments. It's been a thoughtful process, and I also appreciate, and I think a lot of those that are concerned about what may be in the document, the fact you have a companion ordinance that will allow a post-enactment 1-year fix period to address those situations that totally get through, that need to be addressed. So I just want to say thank you for the manner in which you've handled this very important issue.
Thank you. That's our last public speaker on the agenda for tonight. That'll bring us back to the bill. And we do have a number of amendments before us. I don't know which ones are intended to be moved, but we do have 4. And then there was one that was just distributed. Are we able to act on that? That was.
Mr. President, per your rules, you're certainly able to act on it, but the project team might want to review it to make sure that it jives with the rest of the document, that the references are accurate. We haven't seen this amendment before now, so we just might want a little bit of time to review.
Councilor Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. Melendres, I wish you would look at this amendment, and I'm really curious to how this was changed in the IDO from the original that we had, and who made that decision to change that language as far as the community, what are we talking, the community residential programs. How did that come about?
Sure, I can speak to that, Mr. President and Councilor Winter. Community residential programs cover kind of an umbrella of types of people in the current zoning code. The IDO proposes to split those into people who are federally protected under the Federal Housing Act and those who are not. The Federal Housing Act says that you can't impose zoning or land use restrictions on those federally protected peoples, which is why we tried to separate them and not institute distance separation requirements such as the one in this amendment.
But apparently, I mean, we've been doing it as long as I've been a counselor that way, and apparently there seems to be a conflict as far as legal opinions on if that should be happened. So was it the consultant that came in and made that decision to make that change?
Mr. President, Councilor Winter, yes, that was at the direction of the consultant,
Okay.
Clarion and Associates.
Thank you very much. Mr. Melendres, can you, and I don't, you're probably gonna have to look at it, but
Yeah,
can you address it?
absolutely, Mr. President, Councilor Winter. This issue surfaced with council staff just literally today. I have spoken with the speakers that presented concerns with it, and what I've asked is that they provide some of the support that they're pointing to with respect to the preemption issue with the Federal Housing Act, and we will be happy to look at that and review it with city legal and the proponents, and be prepared to address this amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Melinda. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So we do have some amendments. Councilor Jones, do you want to move the bill? And then we'll ask for
Yes, thank you, Mr.
descriptions
President,
of
yes.
amendment.
I think one of the things we need to understand that we will not be voting on the bill itself today. This will be deferred to the next meeting. So with that, I'd like to move Committee Substitute 049.
There's a motion and a second for a due pass on Committee Substitute 049.
And then, Mr. President, I would like to move the amendments to 049. And I think we have those in our stack. Do we not? That would be these.
So should we?
We need to move them one at a time.
One at a time, yeah. And then we do need to, I think it would be helpful to have the staff describe these amendments and what
Yes.
they do.
Councillors, would you like me to go through all 4 in one go, or do you want me to take them one by one?
Why don't we just go ahead and one at a time, please?
Okay, great. Amendment A. This amendment seeks to support the long-term goal of enabling unique infill development projects to take place under the IDO and to diversify the city's supply of affordable housing options. This amendment was presented during the LUPS process, but there was some interest in having a little bit of a discussion about some of the components within this amendment. This amendment approaches several different parts of the IDO, but in particular, there was some interest in the first section of this amendment, which proposes to remove the 2-acre minimum for the PD zone. The purpose of the PD zone is that it's proposed to be a relief mechanism for the IDO. So when something doesn't quite fit into the boxes of what the IDO proposes, the PD is proposed to be that relief mechanism. Removing the 2-acre minimum would make this more flexible and applicable to more parcels. However, there is some very serious concern that this could open up the PD zone to being requested in a lot of situations where maybe it isn't appropriate. And the IDO is seeking to be predictable to both the general public and the development community. And so there's concern that if the PD zone becomes too flexible, that there's the risk of losing that predictability.
Right, and this amendment is sponsored by Councilor Gibson. Councilor Gibson, would you like to say anything more about it?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that, you know, Ms. Morris's summary of the first paragraph really says everything that I've been hearing about this, both sides of looking at this. Our intention, as she stated, was to provide more opportunities for development, infill development. Along Central is a real good place that I can point to that will have these PD zones, but certainly throughout the rest of the city as well. And how many were we expecting to have after conversion of the PD zones? Do you recall? Hundreds, 1,000?
Mr. President, Councilor Gibson, I'm going to ask Ms. Renz Whitmore if she might have a number to answer that question.
President, councilors, I don't have an exact number, but I would guess it's more in the hundreds than the thousands. Today there are probably, how many acres? About 28,000 acres of SU1, which is really what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
the PD that doesn't meet the standards of a base zone. So we'd still have hundreds that are carried over from the SU1s, and the question of how many more we want to administer over time.
And this is more than just a placeholder, right? I mean, and in fact, I think I heard you just say that I could have a piece of real estate that I could request a zone change to a PD. Is that correct? It's not just a placeholder for all the SU1 that is hard to transfer over.
Mr. President, Councilor Gibson, yes, that's correct. It's a zone district in the IDO, just like any of the other zones that anyone could request a change to.
And we don't really want to create another SU1 issue where so much gets put into PD, like SU1, that, you know, it just becomes a walking monster, so to speak. So the rest of this amendment, I think, is pretty non-controversial, I believe. There is another decrease in the minimum project size for a campground or recreational vehicle park from 5 to 1 acre, but that has not seemed to raise a lot of eyebrows with planning or with council planning staff. So, you know, back to the first paragraph, certainly think that this would be a good way of helping to stimulate development of very small parcels. And I think that it would be worth the, running the chance of increasing the number of PD zoned parcels. So, but if anybody else has a different opinion, I'd really like to hear it.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a couple opinions on this. One, it's, thank you, Councilor Davis. Most of the one that strikes me, and it's very confusing for me, we're talking about there is no minimum acreage size for a PD zone district. A PD zone district must contain less than 20 contiguous acres of land. I am confused of why we don't call this revise the maximum acreage and say must contain no more than 20 acres or may contain no more than 20 acres. This is just saying it all backwards in English language. It doesn't work for me. So maybe, I think it's probably saying what you want it to say, but it's not saying it the way people would normally read it. So that's a big one. And second, I think as an amendment at this point in the game, I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, but I'd certainly like to see some of the people, as we've heard tonight, who surround these areas or near these areas or what they are, because this is when we're starting to talk recreational vehicle park, tiny homes, park model trailers, I think we're talking about separate sleeping areas and some combination of shared bath or toilet facilities. We're talking a whole different thing from what's normal in the city of Albuquerque. And we're really talking kind of off the wall here. So I think this is something that needs to be out at least one more time, maybe more, before we vote on whether we put this in the IDO. Thank you.
Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just very briefly on this amendment, if staff can help me just a little bit. I'm looking for our version online, excuse me, but Legistar's down, so I'm going to lean on you just a little bit for some help. I'm asking quickly about the questions on the RV park. What I see in items 3 and 4 there is essentially that we're reducing the size of vehicle parks and then increasing the density sort of the number of vehicles that can go there. Can you just tell me what zones those parks can be in according to the IDO? I just can't pull up my version online right now. I apologize. And we can come back to that in a second. But I'm just curious if it's a residential area or what grade or density needs to be accompanying an RV zone. We can come back to that if we need to pull it up. And I have one more question as well.
Mr. President, Councilor Davis, Ms. Schultz here is double checking, but our understanding is that campground today is an SU1 zoned use, so you have to have a site plan and a special request for it, and it's carrying over as that, so it's an NRSU zone property, so you have to have a special request for it. And is that right? Okay, that's right.
And adjacent zoning to that, could it be, is it a residential or a type of residential hire, or is it commercial only? Do you recall? I'm just trying to be sure we don't put too many of these things in one place in a neighborhood, for example.
Yes. It could go anywhere in the city, but it would require a public hearing and a zone change request for every campground that came in.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. And Mr. President, I appreciate, again, I go back to the same issue we were discussing earlier on the PD zones. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that I yet see the necessity to do this. I'm interested to see. I think we could accomplish where it is as it's laid out in the IDO. Of course, that sort of provides, as I understand, some new structure from what we have today, and laying that process out. And of course, if someone comes along with a really fabulous project, while this 2-acre to 20-acre rule is in place, obviously we could go through a variance. They could go through the hearing process that's available for us now. But it seems that sort of being sure that we're limiting the applicability of these to those larger lots, and I worry that we start traveling down the road of creating these special uses, the 1,000 different rules all over the city for small lots, without the opportunity to see if a more limited use of that would be conducive to smarter and more integrated development. So I'm not sure if this is the right place now, and maybe we shouldn't consider that down in that 6-month process, or perhaps in one of those annual reviews if we find that we're getting a lot of those requests for smaller lots. So I do think it's an important question. I'm just not sure this is the right time yet. I'm not yet ready to think that I might vote for that one. So thank you, ma'am.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, and I guess I should ask, because we depend on them, rely on them quite a bit. Would city planning or staff planning like to give us an opinion of how this would fit in and how you see it working? If you've seen it.
I've seen it.
Mr. President, Councilor Jones and Councilors, I'm Russell Brito with the Planning Department. We did see this amendment when it was first brought up at LUPS Committee as Amendment U before it was pulled. We did have some concerns about the potential proliferation of PD zones, much like we do have with SU1 zoning today. The planned development zone was intended to be for larger properties that had a cohesive theme across them so that they could fit in an area as an infill development or maybe edge development. They can go in almost anywhere in the city, but more than likely they're going to have a very tough test with any kind of zone change request in front of the Planning Commission or the City Council. I believe we'd prefer to see some kind of minimum acre requirement for a PD zone so that we do not get lot-specific or small site-specific zone categories with special uses and regulations that get us closer to where we are today, unfortunately. So we would probably suggest that there be some kind of minimum acreage for a PD zone. And then also clarify the maximum acreage so that it's clear for all users of the code.
President, councilors, let me, just for a little bit of context, 2 acres is about 1 city block. And so below that, you're really asking development to fit into the pattern that's established for that block. So through a base zone, through other regulations that provide a predictable pattern. Above, between 2 and 20 acres, 20 acres, by the way, is about 10 city blocks. Between 2 and 20 acres, you set your own pattern. You are a planned development, so that makes a lot of sense. Beyond 20 acres or 10 city blocks, we want a citywide pattern. And so the minimum and the maximums in the integrated development ordinance are really there to try to protect the existing pattern of small areas, and then on citywide areas, make sure that we don't have a huge portion of the city that's one-off, basically really enforcing and reinforcing the base zone districts in the IDO. I just want to point out that the campground and RVs cannot exist in any zone except NRSU, the special use zone. So they could not go into a PD zone, for example. They have to be NRSU because they are a special sensitive use. And beyond that, I think the other portions of this amendment are entirely non-controversial. As you pointed out, I think they're good improvements.
Councilor Harris.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think one of the concerns as I listened to this about making a PD small is we could get into some of the sometimes even constitutional or land use concerns about spot zoning, where if you have a PD zone, which is a small parcel, you're really allowing spot zoning here and there on any parcel. So you can have a small half-acre parcel, and then you can have its own zone or own zoning, which is actually can be even construed as sometimes unconstitutional, because you're allowing drastically different zoning based on whether or not you can call yourself a PD. So I think I have concerns about this right now. I'll keep an open mind, but I think I like the explanation given by the planning staff and why it's there.
Councilor Gibson.
Well, I heard some people say that they would, Councilor Jones, I believe that you mentioned you wanted to see this deferred? Or just, is it just the first paragraph? It's all of it, okay. Well, then, I almost feel like I should do a closing and ask for a vote.
So, Counselor, would you like to, I mean, we are intending to continue this debate with additional meetings, so.
Right.
I mean, I do see concerns expressed by staff and some from counselors that I share. Would you be willing to hang on with it then?
Yes, let's go ahead and defer this for 2 weeks.
Okay, so.
Mr.
I'll move
President?
for deferral.
I don't think we actually defer.
We don't really need to defer it, but just withdraw the
That's right.
motion to approve
It hasn't
tonight.
been moved.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I would just encourage the sponsor of the amendment to speak with planning staff, and if you make them happy, there's a good chance you'll make a lot of us happy.
All right, thanks. So next is, this is amendment labeled B, and this would be floor amendment number 1, were it to pass, and I'm sponsoring this along with Councilors Gibson and Sanchez, and this really would restore I think the existing distance requirements for standing, but let me just ask summary from staff on that. This is the infamous 100 feet versus presently a 300-foot distance.
Mr. President, councilors, so this amendment would bring the distance for a property owner for standing for appeals down from, up from 100 back to 300 feet per the zone code today. And then for registered neighborhood associations whose boundaries include or are within 600 feet rather than adjacent to the property. And so this would bring those the numbers for standing back to what they are today in the zone code.
And a lot of the discussion about this had to do with being in alignment with our notification process. Would this alter that?
Yes, it would, but it would make it consistent across the city, and so, across the process. Ms. Renz-Whitmore's presentation earlier this evening, she talked about how there were different distances depending on what decision you were appealing. This would still keep the decision distance consistent no matter what decision you're appealing, but the numbers would more closely match what they are today for appealing EPC decisions, LUCC decisions, and DRB decisions.
And, you know, I heard a lot of discussion about that we're not listening. I mean, this and many, many of the amendments that we've already passed and that we have before us are the result of discussions with, honestly, I've spoken with very few developers. I've spoken mostly with neighbors and trying to address their concerns. So just to be clear about that. Councilor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I like planning staff. I mean, the people will have to enforce these things and send out would one of you like to address this and see if this adversely or positively affects the process?
Mr. President, councilors, I appreciate the consistency, absolutely. I think if we're going to change it to the 300 and 600, we'd request that it be 330 and 660, which tracks with other distance requirements in the IDO. In terms of consistency, 330 feet is a 1/16 of a mile, 660 feet is an 1/8 of a mile. Those are numbers used throughout the IDO, so at least we can be a little bit consistent there. In terms of notice, as I mentioned in my presentation, the numbers that are in the IDO are tracking with the existing neighborhood recognition ordinance. And so if we're going to make this change for the appeals, I would request that down the road, when you open the hood on the neighborhood recognition ordinance, that you also change that to be consistent with these numbers as well.
Councilor Jones, did you want to follow up? And just with regard, we realize this is, again, I mean, in some sense, or not in some sense, we flat out are going to add to the load of making these kind of notifications. And I recognize that. But I also just want to say that part of the reason I think that I'll let Councilors Sanchez and Gibson can speak for themselves, but to me, the idea that 330 feet is kind of the classic Albuquerque city block. And that to me seems like a pretty good notification distance for property owners. And then what we're really saying is a couple city blocks distance for a neighborhood association to be notified. So that was the idea behind it. Councilors, other sponsors of the amendment? Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do support the change. I think 330 feet and the 660 feet will give ample opportunities to our communities and neighborhood associations to have the opportunity to come in and make the appeal. Basically, it conforms with what we are doing today. I was somewhat concerned initially that we were going to 100 feet, and that was concerning for me. But I think with these modifications and increasing it even a little bit more will be a big benefit to the neighborhoods.
All right, thank you. Councilor Gibson.
I absolutely agree. You know, at 100 feet, that might be just 2 or 3 houses deep, and you know, you have to deal with vacancies or people are working 2 jobs, and by the time you get to third house, you might have somebody who can, you know, sort of carry the ball. So this gives a little latitude there, and I'd like to see that from 300 to 330 as planning is suggested, and 660 for the second instead of 600. Thank you.
All right, so we'll, if acceptable to the sponsors, we'll make that the 330 and 660. Councilor Jones.
I have no problem with that, but I think, Mr. Brito, yes, there, Mr. Brito, standing right in front of the microphone. I think you had some comments to make about this, about best practices and that type of thing.
Yeah, Mr. President, Councilor Jones and councilors, there was a discussion about how this would maintain what's in today's zoning code, but Ms. Morris did mention that there is a difference between the notification distances for the zoning hearing examiner and the planning commission, where this amendment would make them the same. So that's something to consider if you wanted to just carry over what exists today or make them both the same notification.
And which is which? Today?
Today, the zoning hearing examiner distance is less than the planning commission notification requirement. So this amendment would increase the ZHE notification distance.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Jones?
Well, obviously, that won't help us with the workload, will it? So I'm assuming that we should do, maybe we can amend the amendment or rewrite the amendment for the next time so that we have everything in there that jives and it's the same. Is that your recommendation, Mr. Brito?
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, if the intention of the council is to maintain the notification distance requirements that we have in today's zoning code, then we should probably revisit the language and make sure that it's clear that there are different notification distances for different types of requests that come before different boards.
Mr. Brito, I'm a little slow. Was that a yes or a no that you would like for us to amend something else, or you want us to just change this one?
President, councilors, so we're just looking for clarification. If you're really looking to carry over what we have today, then you're still going to carry over a bifurcated system of distances. If you're wanting consistency with the ZHE, then you'd go with the 100 feet. If you're wanting consistency with the others, then you go to the, we recommend 330 feet, and 660 for neighborhoods to be closer to the EPC provision today. Or if you go with the neighborhood recognition ordinance, that would be within the property, within the neighborhood association boundary and adjacent. So clarity from you all in terms of whether you're trying to recreate what we have today, which is 2 levels, or for 2 different processes, or whether we're trying for consistency.
So I would just say, Councilor Jones, you know, we did just get this into the bill book on Friday. I think we could stand to take a look at it a little bit further before we vote on it, if it's okay with the co-sponsors.
And if I may, Mr. President?
Councilor Jones.
My suggestion would be consistency.
Yes. Well,
Whatever way we go.
That is the goal, certainly, so, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll hold off on that as well. And then let's discuss Committee Amendment C, Councilor Sanchez and staff.
Staff, go ahead.
This amendment, Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, this amendment C clarifies the level of involvement that a neighborhood association may have in a proposed development and calls on applicants to work within the neighborhood meeting process. This amendment, in addition to the proposed language, requires an applicant to identify the concerns that were raised during the meeting and how those concerns are either addressed or if they are not accommodated, why. This is generally best practice among professional applicants to do this, and so the IDO, by spelling this out, is not an undue burden. The amendment also allows a registered neighborhood association to request a facilitated meeting rather than relying solely on the judgment of the city.
All right, thank you. So that summarizes the amendment. I think the one concern I have is sort of was more or less explained by Ms. Morris, which is that once these meetings are required, I think any professional developer and their team would do this kind of work. And you know, it seems to me that in a way the concern, you know, requiring to summarize concerns raised, areas of agreement and disagreement starts to get into some pretty subjective kind of discussion that may or may not be accurate and may or may not be accurately reflected, whether by intention or by omission. And that's a concern of mine. But
Yeah.
I think Councilor Winter also had Councilor Winter. No? Okay,
So,
Councilor Jones.
Mr. President, Councilor Sanchez, who would be the referee? Who's going to be the judge and have the final word on this if the neighbors say that they cannot, they're not being accommodated the way they want, and the applicant says, we can't accommodate you the way you want because it doesn't make financial sense or what, it doesn't meet that. Who's the judge?
I know at many of the meetings that are held in our communities, especially when there's a big development, they will bring in a third party to basically discuss and try to work some of these issues out. And I think it makes it for a more meaningful debate, especially when you've got a big development going into a community where the neighborhoods that are going to be impacted are involved in the process and they can get it worked out.
Councilor Jones.
And I understand perfectly that that sounds good, but if they don't get it worked out, who's the judge? What happens? Who's the final say on yes, you may, or yes, you may not, or no, you may not? I mean, we have to have some kind of a means to stop the stalemate. If we put both parties in a situation where one says, no, we can't, the other one says, no, we can't, then what do we do? I mean, as I see it, in the big business world, we're putting one really big stumbling block. And I'm not saying that the neighborhood shouldn't be included. This is definitely, I love the fact that we're asking the developers to meet first with the neighborhoods and mean it, but I think the little red thing here that says if the neighborhood's concerns may not be accommodated, the applicant must identify the site or project constraints that limit the ability to address the neighborhood's concerns. And my question is, what if the developer says, I cannot do that financially?
Staff.
You're asking too much, then what?
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, this is for the pre-application meeting, and so there is nothing to stop a developer from going ahead and putting in an application for a development. This is just part of their application process, and so their letter justifying the request will also have to identify that they've had a meeting, what was discussed, what issues were raised, and then if there were any issues raised that they weren't able to address, why they haven't addressed it. The ultimate decision maker on it would be the Environmental Planning Commission or the Development Review Board or the Planning Department, depending on the type of development requested. So this would not stop a developer from developing a site or applying to develop a site, but it would just mean that those making the decisions would have a more informed background on what's being requested and what the potential issues are between the neighborhood and the developer.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Morris. So if they don't agree and they go to EPC and somebody doesn't agree with what EPC says, then where are we?
Then we will probably have an appeal.
And then where are we?
Well, it would be the standard appeal process, and it's it would not. It provides an opportunity for the conversation to happen before a development gets to EPC. And in most cases, a developer will want to try and work with the community and try and make changes to their development before they're before a board and before the planning department. And so in the rare occasions where there really is no agreement able to be met, it would go through the appeal process that we have today and would probably end up before us here at council, much as it is today.
And
So,
I see Ms.
I'm sorry,
No.
go ahead. Just quickly, so, I mean, any of these decisions is appealable by the people that we were just talking about in the last amendment who would have standing, right? So, just to clarify that, but Michaela.
Mr. President, councilors, I think one of the intervening steps, Councilor Jones, between this provision and the appeal process is clearer standards in one document with less debate over what's policy and what's regulation. So the integrated development ordinance in general is raising those standards that are predictable and saying, here's what you have to do to get an approval. That's different from today's system where much of the development that requests an SU zone, an SU1 zone, is really a negotiation between the neighbors and the developers to feel comfortable with that development. And much of the discussion between those folks happens far into the process when a lot of money has been spent, a lot of time has been spent, a lot of blood pressure has been raised on both sides. The idea here is that those discussions happen before you've spent a lot of money on the process, before neighborhoods have had their blood pressures raised to a point where it's hard to negotiate. And so these required meetings between the developer and the neighbors are an opportunity to say, I know the IDO has good standards, but I want more. I want some things that the city doesn't require. Have you thought about turning your building this way or moving this or adding a park bench or those things that we really can't require under today's system but often get kind of slipped into an SU1 approval, which is not so legal. This would be the opportunity to have those discussions, work out some of those additional things that the city can't actually require that make the neighbors more comfortable and more willing to be customers of a particular development, and that gets documented in this process. So this moves that documentation out of a site plan where we're enforcing it into a document that's between the neighbors and the developers. And the IDO still has those predictable standards that are actual requirements for us to approve a development.
All right. Councilor Sanchez, your thoughts at this point?
And hopefully, with this in place, we will see less appeals here at the council level where you have the property, the people who are developing this property, the development community, working closely with the neighborhoods to avoid some of the problems that we deal with through appeals. I just think opening that door and communicating will make a big difference in the future, and we probably will see less appeals coming through this, through the full council if people are talking early on. And I just introduced this also tonight, so if you'd like, we can go ahead and hold this over and
all right.
hear it at the next meeting.
Yeah, again, these were all just saw the light of day this week, so.
Right.
This is a good discussion, and this was the intent, by the way, everyone who said, well, you know, why are we moving it to full council? At this stage of the game, we need to be having the full council engaged in this discussion. So the last one that's been added has been, is Floor Amendment D, Councilor Gibson and staff.
Thank you, Mr. Oh, yeah, I'm going to let you guys do this. You're
Mr.
much
President,
better at it
Councilor-
than I am.
Councilor Gibson, I'd be happy to. This would add a qualifier in the section about who has standing for an appeal to the IDO. Right now, if you're a recognized neighborhood association, you have automatic standing if you are, as currently written, adjacent to a development or if the development is within your boundary. This would offer an option to all the areas of town that don't have recognized neighborhood associations or registered neighborhood associations. Those parts of town that aren't organized to have a registered neighborhood association, they don't get that automatic standing because they're not organized. This would offer them a mechanism to have automatic standing, much like their neighbors who might be organized and registered.
All right, Councilor Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ms. Schultz, can you just tell me really briefly, just to remind me, without this provision added in, this sort of extra presumption, still, assuming we pass no matter what, we still have the automatic presumptions in IDO, and maybe they get expanded to 100 to 330 feet or whatever. So even if they're not in a registered neighborhood association, property owners that have a concern that are immediately adjacent or within so many feet that can show some injury or perceived injury can still participate in appeal, even if they're not in a registered neighborhood association. That process is still in place. Is that right?
Mr. President, Councilor Davis, yes, that's correct. This would allow those areas that are outside of those distances to also have a mechanism to have automatic standing.
And Mr. President, if I could follow Ms. Schultz, just to clarify for me, I'm trying to take big wonky language into play it out on a map. I'm looking and saying if it doesn't include an RNA, that the area, do I read this correctly in saying it essentially we're going to create an artificial one, sort of, and I might be wrong in reading this, by creating the minor collectors and major classification maps and then requiring people to get 25% of signatures or something to do that work within the appeals timeline. It's a lot of work, right? And in some areas of the city that are, say, developing, I'm thinking about some of our friends on the west side or Mesa del Sol, for instance, there aren't a lot of those roads. And so these areas could be really large, potentially, if it's in developing areas. Is that I'm making a big generalization, but is that a fair assumption of how this comes about?
Mr. President, Councilor Davis, I think that's a very fair assessment of how this might play out in real time. As you mentioned, the development patterns are very different on the east side of the river and the west side of the river, and because you don't have such a consistent grid on the west side of the river, the requirement to define the areas by minor collectors does become incredibly large on west of the river. And so when you're requiring 25% of households, it would equate to many more households on the west side if someone wanted to follow this procedure than for an area on the east side of the river.
And Mr. President, one last question. I'm reminded we have about 200 and something registered neighborhood associations. And do you know, Ms. Schultz, off the top of your head, just ballpark, what part of this, what percentage roughly of the city that includes? I'm pulling up the map here, but it's been slow. My iPad's been slow all night.
Mr. President, Councilor Davis, I don't readily have that information on hand, but if this amendment were to hold over to the next meeting like the other ones, I think we could do some kind of visual analysis with how this might play out in practice.
Thank you, ma'am. And maybe the sponsor would be amenable to that. I'd love to have some more data on it. I get the point. I just wonder if we could get some harder data on how to do that better.
Councilor Jones.
Thank you. It's my understanding, and I'm not sure whether I need to go to planning or to whomever, but it's my understanding today that anyone can file an appeal against any development process by paying $50. They don't have to live in the city, they don't have to be near the project, they just have to step up and file an appeal. Is that correct? No?
guys better stay in the front row.
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, it is true that anyone can appeal. To have standing to appeal, and the land use hearing officer is the one who actually decides who has standing for appeal. To have standing appeal, you need to show some special and adverse impact of the development on your property or on your something else that has some financial
your
value.
psyche, your concern for the city.
So the language in the zoning code today is pretty open. And this attempt at defining what special and adverse means in the integrated development ordinance is looking to state case law to track with what you actually need to show to have that standing for appeal as an individual.
But if I may, Mr. President,
Counselor.
because I think we've heard a few of these cases, it has to go through the different processes, the different hearing, and it can still make it all the way to council and to court. We're not saying they're going to win, but this can go all the way to court if someone spends the money, and then can be appealed to a higher court if someone wants to spend the money to do that. Is that correct?
Mr. President, Councilor Jones, that is correct.
So really, we haven't changed much of anything here, except that, if I may, because of the standards that we're putting on who, the counting of the 25% of the households and all of this, would we, how, okay, we'd have to have an accurate count of all the lots. We'd have to verify households with some form of proof of residency or ownership. Which one are we going for, or both? And if we're going for only residency, can the resident count as the appellant, one of the appellants, or does it have to be the owner? And could we therefore count, if it just has to be a resident, do we count all the adult residents of the household? Or do we only count one? Or do we only count the person whose name is on the lease or whatever? So how do we do this? And if we're going to make it this complicated, why don't we just leave it our $50 anybody in the world who wants to file a suit files a suit or files an appeal? I mean, this is huge process to try to verify, and all we have to do is miss one person who would qualify, and we have started the process all over again. And I believe the whole idea of all of this is to try to speed up good development, not to stop all development. And this kind of, for me, if I were, which I'm not and never have been, thank you, a developer, this would just make me turn around and go to Texas, which seems to be a standard procedure now. So I don't like this at all. I think it's cumbersome. I don't think there's any way to accurately do it. Sorry, Councilor.
Councilor
It's just
Gibson.
difficult.
It is Halloween. Almost. So here's my intention, and this is to, provide a little bit of justice. It seems to me that the way we have it now is that, neighborhoods are not neighborhoods. We have neighborhoods that are representative and they get special treatment. We have neighborhoods that are not represented by a neighborhood, registered neighborhood associations that, don't quite get the same rights and is that registered neighborhood associations do have. So I was trying to put a little of, make that a little more equal, so that if there was something that was happening, let's say at the edge of my neighborhood, which I guess we've lost our certification now, sorry to say, unless I was, within now 660 feet, if the other amendment passes, no, it wouldn't even be that, because that wouldn't carry over. Unless I lived very, very close to it, I would not really be able to mount an appeal, except the special and adverse clause. And we looked that up today, and that could be difficult to meet, really, to show adversity. But then also the definition for special was legal rights, a legal right to the property, I believe. I don't know. Ms. Schultz, do you recall what that was?
Mr. President, Councilor Gibson, I could find it in about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, I'll keep talking.
Okay.
So that was my intention, is just to provide a little more equity there. Because I really don't think it's fair to play by two different sets of rules. If you're living in a neighborhood, you may not even know you have a neighborhood association. But if you do, then you have a right, a higher right to appeal than if you lived maybe a half a mile away and that neighborhood is not been organized and recognized by the city of Albuquerque.
So, Councilor, if I could, the council has, and previous councils have given a lot of standing and a lot of weight to organized neighborhood associations, and we've now taken on the Office of Neighborhood Coordination. One thing I've always said is that I think most of us very much depend on these organized neighborhoods to advise us and to reach out to us if something's going haywire. And I think what we find, if we were to just open it up to anyone and everyone, then there's a disincentive to organize your neighborhood in a sense. That's a worry of mine.
So if I may, and I've considered that. I had a conversation today. I think there are plenty of incentives to organize. This is only one of them, but there are a lot of other reasons to organize neighborhood. I have a whole door speech that I deliver to my people I'm talking with, why it benefits them to organize and get recognition, acknowledgement from the ONC here at the city. This is only one of them.
Yeah.
And to tell you the truth, geographically, sometimes it just does not work. In my own district, there's a block of, I don't know, maybe 60 homes, 60 to 100 homes that are right on the edge of two neighborhoods, two organized neighborhoods. And they're too small to organize themselves, but neither one of the other two established neighborhoods really want to take them on. So, there's that too.
Councilor Jones?
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this goes beyond recognized and non-recognized neighborhoods, because I think that's overstepping our boundaries if we're saying only if you're an organized neighborhood association you can do this, when in fact anybody in the city can do it. Maybe we should just look at raising the fee. Maybe we should say instead of $50 to file an appeal and stop the process, we should charge $500 to file an appeal and stop the process, and then we might have really serious people who think they have a real issue. I'm just throwing things out, but I believe for us to dictate that only, we're talking a lot of people here, and quite frankly, I could drive by, if I drive down a street that I go down every day, and I see a new development that looks like it's going to be going up, or I've read the papers and I see what's going to happen and I don't like it, I can live 10 miles away and I can file an appeal for $50 and hold it up for months, if not years, in court if I so choose. So I think this is probably a bit getting into the weeds a little too much to try to do this. If people choose to get organized and to fight things, God bless them. That's what we're supposed to do. And thank you for all you people who are out here who give us the what for every time you come in here, because we need it. Sometimes not. But if you're not willing to get organized to do it, why are we sticking, as we used to say on the farm, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink it. Why are we sticking their noses in it if they don't care enough to walk up to the tank and drink the water? So I think I'm sorry, Counselor, I like to support you, but I think this one is just way too much, when anybody in the city can appeal. Thank you.
Councilor Gibson, are you okay with continuing this and for the next meeting? Any other discussions, Councilor, about the process and where we are today? Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. President. I don't know if this is the appropriate time to bring this up, but I just appreciate Councilor Jones. She put in an amendment in the packet that was passed at the LEPS meeting. And I guess this is for staff. I don't know, I guess it was maybe at the direction of staff, and I don't know if it applies to the entire west side, the amendment. I think you ladies know which one I'm referring to. Does it apply to the entire west side?
Mr. President, Councilor Pena, I believe the amendment you're referring to changed some of the NRC zoning to
Right.
MXM. That did
Was-
apply to the entire west side as it was passed at LUPS.
Okay. So there's been some discussion that we had earlier today to change it to north of I-40, I guess the amendment would remain, and then south of I-40, just because when this amendment was introduced, I mean, they really didn't defer to the two councilors that represent the area, and then there's a coalition and another organized neighborhood group that works to revitalize and redevelop West Central, who had really had a lot of input into the zoning that they preferred for the area. So I think you guys have all the language to change it back to the NRC zoning.
Mr. President, Councilor Pena, we can look at having that amendment prepared for the next hearing on the
Thank
IDO.
you. Thank you, ladies.
Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. And if there's a way we could even just remove that entirely and look at it again, I think that'd probably be a good process to just, I guess, isolate that amendment, remove it, and then if the councilor wants to reintroduce that, what would be the best, I guess, the smoothest way to do that? Could we take any kind of action on that tonight?
If I could, Councilor, I think this would be a new amendment, so we would want to have it prepared in advance of the next meeting. But there's nothing to prevent, based on the amendments that were passed by LUPS, there's nothing to prevent any councilor from undoing all or part of those as an amendment for full council. Correct? Yeah. So,
Mr. President.
I mean, so, Mr. Melendez, so just, I mean,
Mr. President, the bill as it came over, it was amended at LUPS. That's the bill that the council is considering.
Right.
If you want to undo something LUPS did, you need to introduce a new amendment to
it's just
undo
by
that.
amendment.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, any counselor that would like to do that may do so. Councilor Lewis.
Mr. President, if we, I don't know, I guess a question about the process, but I would, if we're able to do a floor amendment tonight and actually remove that tonight, I'd like to move that. I guess just some explanation from the staff on how would do that. If it's as simple as that tonight, I'd go ahead and move that.
Mr. President, if I may.
Let's get an answer on this first.
Mr. President, so, for a more complicated amendment, we would need to have it in writing. This particular amendment proposes to amend, as far as us administering the amendment, if I understand it, proposes that came out of LUPS as MXM be amended such that those properties that would be designated with that MXM instead be zoned NRC, which was the original proposal. And that amendment, if you want to make it orally, is something that we could facilitate because it's a relatively simple thing to do. If you wanted to wait and have a writing, certainly that's something that we could look at and vote on, but it's something we could process tonight if you wanted to make that amendment.
Mr. President, I think really what we would be doing is the exact same language. We'd just be really just reversing that. And so, I mean, it really could just be duplicated, from the amendment that was introduced at the LUPS meeting. I mean, if it could be isolated like that, and we could do that orally tonight.
Yeah, Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, I think the amendment would be as simple as the properties on the west side that are proposed to be converted to MXM would be instead converted to NRC. And that would be the amendment that would allow a vote upon that change could be reflected in the IDO the way that it is presented to the council at the next meeting.
So just as you stated right there, we could move that, and our staff would be comfortable with knowing, everybody understanding what that is. Now, if we did that, and I'd recommend that we do, and then what Councilor Pena is wanting to do is we'd have that ability to be able to go through the process of introducing that again or having it in a different. But I think the cleanest way would just be to
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, you could make that amendment. Planning staff did a great job of clarifying that it should be to change the properties that were changed to MXM through the LUPS amendment back to NRC. And that would be taking it back to status quo as it came to LUPS.
Okay.
Councilor Davis?
Thank you, Mr. President. And I think if we're not in a big hurry, I'd love to see us just write that down, put it in the packet for next time, along with the other 4 amendments we've discussed tonight, with some staff analysis. And just my apologies. I know we passed nearly 24 amendments at the LUPS committee. I just don't recall the basis for doing this, and I'd love to hear why. I mean, it seems to me that the inverse of the vote we did would either affirm it or not. If we're not in a hurry, I think I'd rather see us just do this at the next meeting with the other amendments.
And I also agree with Councilor Davis. I think we should wait 2 more weeks. There are some issues that I have with this, regarding what we are looking at doing to go back to what we had originally. We are now in an area where we've got the art project that is going in, and we are looking at higher densities and mixed uses. So I'm not fully sold that should be the case in what you're looking at doing, Councilor Pena. But let's take our time and do it right, and we can work with staff to make sure we can come to a comparable compromise on what we're looking at doing.
I think, Councilor Lewis, it's up to you if you want to make a motion. I would kind of agree with that sentiment that this is something that, and I've always said, look, when I've heard about it, the concern of West Siders has been, I pretty much am going to defer to my colleagues from the West Side as to what their thinking is on this, but.
Mr. President, I'm fine with that. I think really the intent tonight was to ensure that we have something clean that we could start with, that we would defer to the councilors on the West Side and be able to have something clean that would be reflective of some good honest discussion and what the community has recommended to us. So I'm glad with, I don't know if Councilor Pena has a comment on it, but I'm glad to see if we can work on this over the next few weeks and see if we can come up with something that we can start again.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I think that, exactly what you're asking for, Councilor Sanchez, by rescinding this will give us an opportunity to ensure that it's the correct zoning that we have input on. And if we leave, I think if we don't rescind it this evening, then what's going to happen is that we're going to have some conflicting stuff when we come back in 2 more weeks, because this will just kind of do a clean slate, and then we have an opportunity to make those changes.
Any councilor can make a motion. I would just say that this was discussed at length in LUPS, and we might benefit from those who are not members of LUPS who might not have heard the discussion to hear it. Councilor Winter.
Yeah, that was me.
All right, thank you. If that's all right.
Okay. And you want to rescind it?
I'd make a motion to rescind it.
Okay.
Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second to rescind that provision. This would be amendment number 1 for this evening. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Yeah, Councilor Winter.
Because I'm not aware and I was not in LUPS, I think I need some more explanation, and not that I don't support what you're trying to do, but I just would like to understand it first. So I guess if we didn't approve it tonight, we could approve it at the next meeting, correct?
Correct. So there's a motion and a second. Councilor Jones.
Sorry. For the people who don't understand, I sponsored this because it was a West Side situation, and the West Siders weren't available to sponsor it. It follows the intent of the comprehensive plan. It follows the intent of the ART and the increased transportation and the increased livability and retail and business along the corridor, and that's why I sponsored it. And I will not, I won't support rescinding it. I will obviously be very open-minded to anything that's brought forward to change it.
Mr. President. Go ahead.
Councilor Harrison, then Councilor Pena.
And I'm getting the sense that Councilor Sanchez is kind of wanting to hold off too. So it looks like we don't even have kind of one voice on the west side on this issue at the moment. And I would kind of like to understand the reason for the amendment before I rescind it, although I kind of like the idea of going to clean slate and starting again, but we can do that with one amendment that sort of brings it back where we need to, but keeps part of it where we might want to. So again, I'm likely to defer to what the West Side councilors want, but it doesn't seem like we have one voice from the West Side councilors at this moment, so I think I'm not going to vote in favor of it.
Councilor Pena.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, we can vote on it next time. What actually happened is with the NRC zoning for the area, it was to address the jobs to housing imbalance that we have in the community. And we actually talked and met with the coalition of the neighborhood associations and the West Central Community Development Group and really tried to address that because, as you know, the Southwest area is limited in terms of retail space for the area. So one of the things that people wanted to do was really to secure Central as a corridor for commercial development because we are saturated with housing in our area. And then the other issue was to preserve the views that everyone has talked about that are so important for our community. So when we talk about the housing, that there's not a need along the corridor, because there's other opportunities in the adjacent neighborhoods to do that, that we can also preserve the views. So this is something that's been vetted through the community, and you know, to me it doesn't matter, we can go ahead, but what happened was, as Councilor Jones stated, is that she did it because there were no West Side councilors available, and somebody brought up the amendment, and it was an amendment that was introduced without being actually even going to the councilors in the area to get their blessing and really talking with the community groups that actually represent that area. So it doesn't matter.
So would you rescind your or remove your motion at this time then, or would you like to?
We can wait till next time.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yeah, Councilor.
Mr. President, just another quick comment on that. So this came out of really trying to, and I think, you know, some residents on the west side and trying to really listen to the community on this and come up with something that was smart and good. But I think in the process, and you know, if it's something that has an effect on another, you know, council district and, you know, other parts of the west side that we haven't completely thought through, this is just a process issue for me. I just want to make sure that it's something that that everybody had a part of, you know, being able to weigh in on and make sure we had the very best for it. So if, you know, I was thinking that if we rescinded this, it might just be the best for the process to be able to start again with it and move it along. If we could do the same thing with an amendment and prepare an amendment and be able to discuss this by the time we have our next meeting, that's fine too.
And I think that, I mean, I do stand behind our LUPS committee work, and and also know that you know, the only West Sider on the committee was not available for those meetings, and so this is an opportunity to do that. So, and I'm supportive of whatever you guys come up with. I'll tell you that right now. So we're back on the bills. We've heard these amendments. Other general conversation or discussion or comments from councilors at this point? We do have some other items on the agenda tonight. I'll move a do pass then, or did we? Did you? You did on CS 049 only.
Yes. I'd like to move deferral to November 6th. I did move a do pass. I had a second. Now I'm moving a deferral to November 6th because we didn't vote on any of the amendments, so I can't do it as amended. So just move deferral to November 6th.
There's a motion and a second for deferral of committee substitute 049 until November 6th. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? And that passes. And then I'll move a do pass on committee substitute R213.
Second.
And there's a second. And I'll move a deferral until November 6th on committee substitute R213.
Second.
All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? And that passes. And I'll move a do pass on committee substitute R240.
Second.
And there's a motion and a second. And I'll move to deferral until November 6th on committee substitute R240.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? And that passes. That takes us to item D, Councilor Gibson, committee substitute 050, Pond Breakers Ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is CS 050, amending the City of Albuquerque Code of Ordinances, Article 6 and Chapter 13, ROA 1994, the Pawn Brokers Ordinance, adding provisions for certain buyers of precious metals and gems. I'm going to move a do pass on this, but I do so with the intentions of just hearing some conversation, discussion, debate on this. This bill, as I mentioned before, is certainly not ready for me to move for passage. It still has work to do, but Mr. Melendez can kind of take us through some of the amendments that are pending for it and discuss the bill more thoroughly. Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion for a do pass. Is there a second? Is there a second for do pass on committee substitute 050?
I'll second for the purpose of discussion.
There's a motion and a second for do pass. All right. And thank you. Mr. Melendez.
Thank you, Mr. President, Council. I'll go over the bill the way it sits today, and then I'll also discuss some of the amendments that we've been discussing with Councilor Gibson as sponsor and some of the industry groups we've been meeting with. I'll start by saying that this ordinance developed in collaboration with APD and the City Legal Department to address issues that the police department felt like it was having with respect to enforcing against pawnbrokers. In the city, the APD concedes, for purposes of discussion, that the large majority of the pawn industry is doing a good job of cooperating with APD, but the ordinance does not give them the tools to address enforcement against some of the more problematic businesses. The ordinance proposes to do a couple things. It enhances the record keeping for pawn shops and also includes metal buyers, which are presently unregulated, and that would essentially apply to buyers of precious metals that melt them down into a form that are essentially unrecognizable after they are sold to that purchaser. The record-keeping provisions would have the shopkeeper keep and hold a photocopy of the seller's identification or the pawner's identification, collect a thumbprint from the seller or pawner during the transaction, take a color photograph of the item sold as part of the transaction, and also post a sign informing persons that they would be photographed and their merchandise would be photographed as well. It also gives some additional enforcement to APD with respect to inspecting the premises where pawn material is held. What we've been told in enforcement is that certain areas of pawn premises are being described as off limits, as housing personal items that cannot be inspected by APD, and there's a suspicion that some of the merchandise in there is being basically shielded from inspection, which is inconsistent with the ordinance. And the ordinance right now doesn't give good, strong language to allow APD to inspect those types of areas. Also, as we've heard from public commenters tonight and industry commenters, it proposes to eliminate the ability to do an immediate cash transaction in favor of a check by mail 3 days after the transaction. Having said that, in the committee substitute that was passed at LUPS being where it is now, I will report that we've met with Councilor Gibson, and I've also reviewed some amendments for Councilor Lewis as well relating to some of these issues, and specifically to address potentially the cash rule, the 3-day holding period, and some of the other provisions that we've heard a lot about tonight. Also, with respect to the industry that it targets, I think that part of the language may have inadvertently included some industries that were not within the scope or purview of what APD was having issues with, specifically jewelry stores, coin buyers. All those things have been discussed as being some amendments that would come forth to essentially exclude those types of businesses from coverage under the ordinance. As Councilor Gibson said, there's work in progress and amendments would be forthcoming, but that's the place where the bill sits today.
Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. A couple questions. Is there any distinction, and I'm asking because of some of these things of knowing the original bill and that maybe not being completely aware of what kind of amendments might be being discussed right now, but any distinction between pawnbrokers and gold buyers, and also, as you mentioned, Mr. Melendez, just other types of business that do this similar type of buying and selling? How do we make those distinctions, and is there any attempt to do that?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, those are really good questions, and the ones that are sort of the most challenging in developing these types of regulations. The way that it's written right now, there's a definition of what a pawnbroker constitutes and a definition of what a gold buyer is. The pawnbroker one is a more tried and true definition because cities always regulated pawnbrokers. With respect to gold buyers, it includes people that are selling precious metals, and when the buyer, the business that's buying those, is melting them down into some other form. So based on that narrow definition, relatively narrow, it wouldn't immediately intend to include jewelry stores that are dealing in secondhand jewelry, because I think the issue is when the jewelry comes in, it looks a certain way, and immediately after it's there, it's processed into something that looks completely different. And for law enforcement purposes, it's hard to track what the specific merchandise was and whether or not it was the subject of a crime. However, the ordinance could certainly be clearer in excluding jewelry stores, which was not intended as part of the net of what APD was looking to deal with. Also, jewelry manufacturers, folks that buy in bulk metal, a piece of sheet metal that by an artist will be turned into a piece of jewelry. It's not clear as drafted today that that type of industry would be excluded, although again, that's another industry that was not intended to be caught up. Finally, coin dealers present another special type of industry that was not the original intent of regulation. And so that needs to be addressed as well. And in the direction that I've gotten, that we've discussed, is that as a general matter, coin buyers would be excluded ultimately.
So this is a pretty diverse industry, and there's many different definitions and many different types of businesses that could fall under this. And so you almost have to I guess to try to address it, you almost have to look at several different bills and a lot of different, and then you begin to isolate and almost pick out some of the types of buyers and sellers, and now we're putting people at a disadvantage here. So I mean, I think that there's so many challenges to this. Another one would be this question would be the $100 fee that it goes from $100 to $500, and it just doesn't seem like there's any real. Just seems arbitrary. Is there any? I mean, where'd that originate from?
Sure.
Is there any?
Sure, Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, I'd be happy to address that. Certainly, that fee setting is a policy function of the council. Certainly, the basis for that is that the annual permit fee for pawnbrokers hasn't been updated since 1981. And so just given the passage of time, that $100 doesn't go as far as it used to. And if you think about what the purpose of the fee is, it's related to the nature of the regulation that the industry is under. If the city is putting in a lot of resources in order to enforce and regulate a heavily regulated industry, which pawnbrokers traditionally are, the fee would then be intended to help sort of offset some of those costs, and it just hasn't been adjusted since 1981. So that's the basis for that.
All right. So, I mean, again, it's not related to any actual costs or any good analysis of the actual cost of the department, what it takes to regulate it. It's kind of, you know.
Correct, Mr. President.
Inflation, really?
That analysis hasn't been done. I'll be honest, it's sort of a ballpark inflation number.
It's ballpark, there's no analysis that's been done on it. How about the fingerprinting? So does the fingerprinting apply to pawning, let's say, pawning a gold ring? And by pawning, many and some of the people in the industry here tonight had talked about that. I mean, a very, very large percentage of the business that a lot of the pawnbrokers do is pawning, which means it's private. It's people's private property. It never really is exchanged. It's just it's really a loan, is what it is. And so a fingerprint for a pawned item, would that apply in this bill?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, another good question. As drafted right now, the ordinance doesn't clearly make that distinction. However, in discussions with the sponsor, that's another issue that would need to be addressed moving forward. Because, as you're suggesting, for a bill that is intended to help with stolen merchandise, the pawn transaction, where a person is leaving the property with the intent to come and redeem it, is probably less suspect than one where it's a quick sale. And so those types of clarifications would still need work as the bill proceeds.
So, I mean, again, you have so many types of transactions. I mean, one being, pawning, and where the ownership doesn't transfer here, and yet the bill's not clear on that. And we're almost criminalizing, people that are, again, you draw some conclusions that we're almost penalizing people in poverty, that need to be able to pawn something to be able to have some cash in, a few weeks. And so anyways, those are some conclusions and things that I think that you can draw on. But again, the question raises so many, of those kinds of conclusions. How about record keeping on a transaction like that? What would so again, my understanding is that pictures are taken, not only a fingerprint but also ID, and then pictures are held, and also it's almost anyways, it seemed to me like it was also a presenting. So now we currently have the ability for law enforcement agencies to inspect, but is this taking that a little bit further as far as is reporting that? I mean, now we're it seems like there's some confidentiality type challenges that we might be dealing with here also. You see that?
Mr. Melendez, is there?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, the reporting requirements are enhanced. They would include the photograph of the item, the photograph of the ID, the thumbprint, and the bill would call for those to be kept as part of the records of the pawnbroker for inspection by APD.
13 people signed up to speak.
Okay, one quick question, Mr. President. Also, is it in this bill the understanding that any law enforcement agency in the entire state could, because of this bill, would now have access to anything that's been pawned or sold to a gold and silver or pawn shop within the city of Albuquerque? So let's say Roswell or a city jurisdiction, Raton, could come to Albuquerque and any pawn shop and have the authority, the jurisdiction to be able to inspect anything they purchased?
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, the ordinance defines a law enforcement officer who would have authority to inspect, and it does include public safety department administered by the state or any political subdivision of the state. So it would include enforcement authority by sworn law enforcement officers beyond APD.
In any law enforcement agency in the state of New Mexico that would have jurisdiction
Mr.
within
President,
the city of
correct.
Albuquerque,
State
to
or
inspect.
local, that's
Okay.
right.
Thanks, Mr. President.
Thank you. So, Vice President Winter.
Thank you, Mr. President. Council Lewis brings up some really good questions, and I understand the intent of this bill, but through public comment and all this discussion, boy, there's a lot wrong with this. So I'm going to make the motion that we move it back down to the Finance Committee for further work and discussion. I think that it did come out without a recommendation. There wasn't a whole lot of input, so I would make the recommendation that we send it back to Finance Committee for further review and work.
That's a motion. There's a motion and a second. Let me hear from staff.
Mr. President, we're just checking the procedural way to do that, and you're proceeding appropriately.
All right. And then while we're doing that, Councilor Harris.
Thank you. I'll support that motion. I'd also support even a do not pass. And just to start over, here's my concerns about the bill, is that it's proposed sort of as a crime-fighting mechanism, but, I mean, bad guys don't care if it's the city of Albuquerque. And if all we're going to do is make people who are in this industry not be able to make it work in the city limits, they'll just go to the North Valley or the South Valley, or they'll go to Harris, or they'll go to Edgewood, which is in Santa Fe County, or they'll go to Rio Rancho, which is in Sandoval County. I mean, I don't think we're going to, even if this was something that would help within the city limits, we're just going to push the bad guys who break into houses and have a bag of stuff go to someplace else, and then we're going to find out who's going to take it pretty darn quickly. So, I mean, one thing we might want to do is sit down with the industry, as well as maybe even sit down with our friends in Bernalillo County Commission, and maybe we can get 2 companion ordinances going simultaneously, because I don't think we do anything. You know, I'm going to be flat out against anything that regulates someone on Manal just to push the business into the South Valley, because that's all this would do right now. So, you know, let's find something that actually works in a comprehensive way and actually gets the industry's input before we go forward.
All right,
but I'll support this motion.
There is a motion and a second. Let's hear the procedure on what the correct language is.
Mr. President, it's correct as proposed, simple majority to commit or recommit to a committee.
All right. So there's a motion and a second. So on that referral to committee, is there any discussion? Councilor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. President. It would be appropriate to make a recommendation for a do not pass. I'm just asking the staff, Mr. President, if that would take precedence over the current motion.
No.
Mr. President, Councilor Lewis, are you proposing to make a motion to deny today, or to suggest to the committee that they make?
I'm moving it. I did be moving it as a do not pass.
Well, so this would just be for a referral, just as a point of order. This would be for a referral back to committee. So there wouldn't be we would be asking the committee to re-weigh in on the subject. So I don't think, as far as I know, in terms of precedent and order, we couldn't send it back to committee with a recommendation from the council.
Mr. President, that's correct. To the extent that the proposal is to do not pass tonight, we'd have to dispose of the current motion first, because that motion would not take precedent. Our rules describe the committee process as the committee voting with respect to recommendations to the council and not the reverse, so that's not really contemplated by the rules.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second for a referral back to committee on the bill. Councilor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we vote, I would really hope that the council would listen to some of the people that we have here. We have representation from APD who have been very patient, have to go to work tomorrow morning. It's after 10 o'clock, and I know that we have some people who signed up for public comment who have been equally as patient. You know, there are some good reasons for drafting this bill, and between City Legal and APD, we got a good start. I'll repeat myself, it's not finished. It still needs things to be fixed in it and addressed and things taken out. But before you make that vote, I would hope that we could at least hear from the people who are here.
I think the motion takes precedent over at this point, overhearing public comment, if I'm not correct. If I'm not mistaken.
Mr. President, I actually think you have discretion in whether or not you want to hear from the public before you vote on the motion.
Okay, but I mean, just to be clear, the intent to send it back to committee would be to hear public comment. I would.
Mr. President, correct. So you could call for the vote now and head that off if you'd like.
All right, well, I will ask for a vote of the council of whether they wish to hear public comment as opposed to this motion.
I think if someone's been here for the last 5 hours.
Okay, yeah. All right, so we will hold that's the motion on the floor. We'll move to public comment. I'll call out 3 people at a time. The first 3 are Dina Piper, Angela Vaughn, and Michael Steinberg. Okay, is there anyone from the public who would like to speak from that group? If not, the next 3 people are, okay. All right.
Can I have you guys pass this on? Thank you, Mr. President. Again, thank you for the board for listening. I didn't know we could email you all. That's how ignorant I am. So I'm sending you something around, basically giving a quick view of what we do. And again, we're talking about the fact that, you know, you've mentioned it many times, our customers will be forced to payday loans if we have to go out of business because we can't make loans. You understand all that. Again, our average loan is only $110. That's within our industry pretty much right now in Albuquerque. Banks don't make loans under $1,000. So our loans are definitely needed. Pawn shops have been on Leads Online for 2 years now. It's a very simple project. We volunteered with APD to go on Leads Online. Bring the gold buyers on would be very simple. Page 2 of what I gave you is a tier system they use, I believe, in Denver. Pawn shops should be pawn shops. Right now, APD is bringing the gold buyers into being a pawn shop. We disagree with that. Pawn shops should do the pawning. Gold buyers should set up their own system on Leads Online. And then look at, Denver has flea markets, secondhand stores, everybody reporting to them right now. It could be brought in. Then we know where the items are going, which they are not, right? We don't know right now where it's going to. Photos, they said, again, the problem I have with photos and thumbprints is I've been 35 years in business. Once I've been to court. Twice in the last 15 years I've heard of any of my customers being prosecuted. Which means if they are catching them, yes they are, but they're not bringing us in on the prosecution. I've had customers come in, they say, you know, they just took this away instead it was stolen, and they said, we never heard anything about it. The $500 fee is a 500% increase. Pawn fees have not gone up since 1976. That's a big thing for us. We can live with it, but it's coming up. Officers from anywhere in the state, I like the word jurisdiction. I thought that was very good. We can live with that part, possibly if there's jurisdiction. A lot of these places like Roswell, I don't think has jurisdiction in Albuquerque. I don't want to hand things to a Roswell policeman. Anyway, basically, that's, thank you, everybody. Councilor Gibson, thank you. I'd like to meet with you. Just take a quick look here again, if I may, for another minute. Real quick, like the list of all the people who do not give to APD and the people that do report to APD, which is us. And the last sheet just shows how many transactions we actually do. I tried to get statistics from APD. They would not give them to me, how many items they actually seize from the 16 association pawn shops. I don't know about 2 other ones. We do 250,000 loans, they pick up 150 items, they said. I don't see a purpose in this law right now. I agree we need to work on the law to do something with crime. I would love to meet with somebody. We have ideas of how going on pawn shops alone isn't gonna do it. We gotta get everybody in with us, where you can see where everything goes.
All right, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Next, so Dina and Angela left. So next is Roger Fenzel, Danny Cox, and Art De La Cruz. Mr. Fenzel.
Thank you, Mr. President and councilors. I would like to hear at some point, as Councilor Gibson said, from the police department as to their justification, because I've heard a lot of things which I frankly think are misinformation, uninformed. Oh, wrong one? This one? Okay. I've heard a lot of things spread around in the media, et cetera, that are either misinformation or outright lies. I don't believe in fake things. It's either one or the other. I'd like to hear what the information is, because what they're proposing will put the pawn shops out of business and will prevent people from being able to pawn things when they need to do that. It's very clear. Right now, when a person pawns, they have to show a photo ID. What is a fingerprint going to add, other than to be an abuse of the person's person, and they're offended by it? They've been able to prosecute and arrest people based on the photo ID. What do they need the fingerprint for? Secondly, photographing each and every item is really impossible. It's really impermissible. Right now, the pawn shops are the only ones of the jewelry stores which take jewelry in. They buy jewelry from estates. They're not regulated. The gold and silver buyers, they're not regulated. The gold buyers, the coin buyers are not regulated. The only one regulated right now are the pawn brokers, and they're following all the rules. I'd like to know who they believe among the pawnbrokers has been melting down jewelry. If they know that, then they should go after them. And secondly, and finally, what good is this law with these prohibitions in it going to do to find the people who are melting down the jewelry? It's not going to address that. You got a solution for a problem that doesn't exist. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Danny Cox, followed by Art de la Cruz, and then Jolene Vigil.
I don't know quite how this works. Can we turn it on? I don't know if you... Yeah, you can't see it very well. Hi, Mr. President and Council, thank you for letting us speak. I'm Danny Cox. I'm with Rio Grande. We are a distributor to the jewelry industry. We employ about 400 people here in Albuquerque. 95% of our business is out of the state of New Mexico. We supply product to jewelers who use it, and in the process of making their jewelry, they create scrap. Part of our service to them is to buy that scrap back and sell them some more product. We're included in this the way it is worded now. The state has come up with proposals similar to this every year for probably the last 5 years. We've talked to them many times, and they come back with the same proposal instead of fixing it. If you guys came up with something meaningful, maybe the state would do the same thing, but if it's just the city of Albuquerque, it doesn't solve anything. So I think that's really all you need. I've got more of those little pamphlets if you want them.
Yeah. But leave as many as you have there, or at least 9 or 10 of them. Thank you.
I didn't bring that many because I
Yeah,
wasn't planning on being here tonight.
We can Xerox what's needed beyond that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next is former Commissioner Art de la Cruz, and then Jolene Vigil and Alex Trujillo.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good evening, councilors. Let me first start by congratulating Councilor Sanchez, Councilor Gibson, Councilor Harrison, Councilor Pena, and Councilor Lewis. Congratulations on you being in the runoff. I am representing and supporting the pawnbrokers of Albuquerque, and there needs to be an understanding that there are absolutely different businesses, and they're being lumped together, and there's no differentiation being made between them, and that is an educational process that is critical. I believe the council needs to understand clearly the differences, and certainly the public does. Changes to the pawnbrokers ordinance today has not included the pawnbrokers. They have great ideas, they want to participate, they live in this great city, and they want to make sure that if there is any criminal element that it's trying to sell to pawns, they want to exclude that as well, because they have families here as well, their employees live here, and they want to have a great city, and that means reducing crime. And so I applaud Councilor Gibson for her effort. I think as she already understands, I think a due pass is premature at this moment. The pawnbrokers want to participate, they're ready to participate, and please give them a chance to do so. To date, they have had no invitation to the table, and they have sought that invitation. I always like to think that pawnbrokers and pawn shops are low-hanging fruit, because it has become part of our vernacular to say, oh, something was taken, something was stolen, it must have been pawned already. No, it could have been gone and sold at a flea market, at a consignment shop, at a secondhand store, to just members of the public. I can tell you that I have been at grocery stores and been approached by people who want to sell something. And I can tell you that stuff is very often sold in just that way. Right now, the pawn shops are indeed heavily regulated. They volunteer with leads online. They describe every item that they take, whether it is a pawn or a buy. Under state law and city law and county law, pawn shops have to, may I take a moment?
Finish your sentence, please.
Pawn shops have to hold those items for 15 days anyway. And they are doing that, they are participating, and we all want a city devoid of crime, but let's give them a chance to have that voice.
Mr. La Cruz, I think Councilor Davis has a question.
Commissioner, thanks for hanging out with us. I'm sure you missed these long meetings. Do you have an opinion? I wonder, I appreciate that, and I do hear that the pawnbrokers that have contacted me and in conversations they've talked to you want to participate in this and want to be a part of the conversation about how we make a distinction between the good folks and the bad folks and the different types of businesses. Do you think there's a process or a way for us to do that better here at the council in these types of forums, or back at the committee process, where you have an opinion one way or the other about the best way to facilitate some of that conversation?
Mr. President, Councilor Davis, I think it's a little bit of both. I think that each venue has and provides an opportunity to get a good law, a law that is sustainable, a law that it won't be challenged in court, and doesn't violate people's rights. One of the ones that I think sounds good, but I think violates people's rights, is that any piece of property or any building that you have on your property somehow is suspect and then should therefore be accessible to law enforcement. When any other citizen, you would need to get a warrant, a search warrant for that property. It assumes that the pawn shops and pawnbrokers are criminals and are hiding something. And I think that's just frankly unfair.
All right. Thank you. Next is Ms. V. Hill, followed by Alex Trujillo, followed by Matthew McGuire. If you hear your name, please come on up. Followed by Robert Gorelick. So is Ms. V. Hill gone? Apparently. And then Mr. Trujillo. And are you Mr. McGuire?
I am Mr. McGuire.
All right.
Hello, President Benton and the members of the council. My name is Matthew McGuire. I'm an owner-operator of a pawn shop here. I've owned my store for 27 years. I've been in the business for 35. I'm speaking in opposition to the bill to the way it currently is written. I've worked for many years in Santa Fe. 10 years ago, we tried to redo all the laws. I spent 3 years on it, many, many hours. We didn't get anywhere. It was a huge undertaking. Unfortunately, we didn't get very far. I don't want to go through the same thing over and over and over. I think that something good could come out of this. It's unfortunate that I didn't hear anything about this till a week ago. I've been in business for 27 years here. I would love to help anybody do something that is positive to make this move forward to accomplish the goals that are in front of us. As again, I just don't want to go over and beat a dead horse. You know, my store is extremely busy. We have about 12,500 loans in 16, over $2 million in loans at $160 a piece. You know. At my store, 86% of the people come back and get their stuff. Thieves do not want to get that. They want the money. They don't care about the property. You know? We had 9 items picked up out of the 12,500 items in 06. Anyways, you know, one of the problems that I have with it is if we pass something that doesn't work, the city can easily abandon using that whatever it is that's passed. They can say, well, that's not working for us. We'll go on to something else. But when you do that, you leave it on the books. I have to continue with that indefinitely, you know. So possibly a pilot program. And we can put together a pilot program and see if it works. If it works, we move in that direction. If it doesn't work, we back off and go a different direction. Anyways, I'm always available for questions. I'll give anybody my phone number, email. I'll invite anybody to come to my store. You can hang out with me for an afternoon. I'll show you the back room. I'll introduce you to my customers. You'll find out in a very quick manner that 99.9% of my customers are there to get diapers and to get P&M from shutting off their electric tomorrow. And P&M doesn't wait 3 days. They shut it off whenever it's time to shut it off. Anyways.
Thank you, Mr.
My name is
McGuire.
Matt McGuire. I'd be happy to help any way.
Mr. President?
And if you want to give the contact info to staff, we'll distribute that to the council.
We have a meeting that's supposed to end at 10:30. It's 10:25. We really need to enforce a 2-minute time frame on these speakers. And also, I have a PID that people have been waiting for because they need to get building, so if we can move it along.
Councilor Gibson.
So I appreciate this and that we are going late into the hour, but we do have 3 police officers who really need to speak to this bill. So can we just at least hear from the 3 police?
Counselor, we're going to finish with the public comment. And
Oh, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, I
I'm
thought we were
going to move
finished.
that we suspend the rules to extend the meeting until 10:45. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Opposed? That passes. So let's complete the public comment list, and I apologize for letting people go on because we've belabored this ourselves, and here we are. So next is Robert Gorlick, Yesenia Jefferson, and Felix Nunez. If you hear your name, please come up to the front.
Mr. President, Councilor, and Councilor Gibson, I want to introduce myself. My name is Robert Gorelick. My wife and I are owners of Old Town Jewelry and Loan in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We've been in business for over 35 years. We employ 12 full-time employees and are very proud of our business and being in Albuquerque. I'm here tonight to offer my experience and my expertise to help rewrite this bill to make it work for all businesses to help fight crime. The way the bill is written right now, of course, you already heard this, it really does hurt our business as well as our 1,000 customers that we have that we deal with on a monthly basis. All we want is to be heard and to have the same rights that the gold and silver buyers do to talk to you. And so we could help rewrite this law to work for us, to work with APD and you, the city councilors, to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Ms. Jefferson here? And then Felix Nunez, and the last speaker will be Jay Johnston.
Hi, my name is Yesenia Jefferson, and I'm here as not only I work in a pawn shop, I've been working for pawn shops in 10 years. I buy from a pawn shop. I also pawn my jewelry there. I'm a single mother of 3 kids, and that's how I've been able to make it in the past 6 years. I think to me it's very unfair that you have to wait 3 days and then get a check when you have to pay an extra fee to cash a check if you don't have a bank account or something like that. Also, Friday, my credit card was stolen, the number. Somebody in Tulsa, Oklahoma used it. I didn't have no money for groceries, so of course I went to my pawn shop, pawned my jewelry, and I got some money for the weekend. I will not be able to wait 3 days until today, Monday, when I could have gone to Wells Fargo to get a new card. There's a lot of details are not said and a lot of things are not separated. And I wouldn't want to be one of those people on the bottom when I'm already on the bottom. And just because people don't want to realize what is the real thing, the real problem. I don't mind getting my fingerprint done. I don't mind having a picture with my ID. I don't mind telling them what my jewelry is, because I go and pick up my jewelry, because I use it for the next year to start over, to take care of my kids. Ex-husband doesn't help, so I have to rely on myself and my pawn shop to take care of my family. Thank you.
Felix Nunez, and then Jay Johnston.
Council President Ben, thank you for your time. Council members, thank you for your time. Felix Nunez, I am part of the law enforcement side. I'm a chief of police in north of here, up in Sandoval County, a small village. Recently, we've actually had an outbreak of property crimes, and we narrowed it down to one house where that ended up to a multi-jurisdiction all agencies coming in. Now, is it common? Yes, it is common to find pawn receipts in the homes, in the cars, and it's on the individuals. I've had cases in the past where we find one subject had dozens of pawn receipts. Here's the deal. We know there's these crooks, these thugs, whatever you want to call them. They're going to certain places, they're fencing at that house, that person has the fence house, will then go out and pawn the stuff on a slow basis. We know a property crime occurs that morning, they're already pawning off the stuff. If it's metals, if it's electronics, whatever's easy. They know they steal stuff that's not traceable, stuff that they can move fast. When you have to sit there and tell a victim, now this is about the victims, tell a victim that, hey, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do because you don't have the serial number. You lost grandma's ring. You lost that at your grandfather's metals. Well, meanwhile, bad guy, thug, whatever you want to call it, is out pawning them off. Pawn shops is in a gray area. All we're asking for is to close that and work with their pawn industry and clean it up. Because we could sit there and say something different, say, oh, no, we're not, we're good people. Yes, you are good people. You're Albuquerque business people, and we thank you for that. And if you're such that great people, then at that point we ask you to come along with us, let's sit at the table and come together with a solution and fight the artery that's bleeding this city, is theft and property crimes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, I just asked this gentleman,
Harris.
but you would agree with me that if the South Valley's not regulated and Albuquerque is, aren't you just going to push the bad guys that pawn their stuff in South Valley?
Well, that's interesting because you know what?
That's a yes or no question. You're late.
Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Won't you just push the stuff to the county? If you over-regulate Albuquerque, make it too strenuous, won't you just go someplace else?
Yes, but I think everybody else should come on board. Thank
Okay,
you.
I agree. Thanks.
Jay Johnston?
Mr. President, councilors, thanks for letting me speak. My name is Jay Johnston. My wife and I own the Albuquerque Pawn Shop at 5th and Lomas. We've been there for 43 years. I personally been there, our family, I've been there 37 years. My wife's grandfather opened the first pawn shop in Albuquerque in 1957, so we've been helping Albuquerque people for over 60 years. A lot of our customers are on a fixed income. You know, they don't have money stashed for emergencies, flat tire, you know, need gas or whatever. I had a guy in this morning that he was $60 short. Matt had said something about, you know, PNM. He was $60 short for his PNM bill, so he pawned his TV. And then right before I came to this, there was a gentleman came in. He was $28 short on paying his car insurance that he had to pay today. You know, I figure 92% of my customers redeem their stuff. And in my database, excuse me, I have 61,610 names. In the last 3 years, since January 1st of 2015, I've done 24,455 transactions, and only 6 items were seized. Like Matt said, you know, we report to leads online. You know, every day whenever I close up, I hit a button and send it in. But what I'd like to say is we'd like to get together with, you know, people writing the laws or whatever. We have a lot of good ideas. We want to work with you, like the gentleman right before me said. Get everybody on page. You know, I heard that, you know, the Gold and Silver Exchanges had a meeting with somebody, and we never heard anything about it. We'd be happy to go. You know, we want our city to be crime-free as well. And so, you know, anything we can do, if you just call us, we'll be happy to meet with any one of you. And my shop's open to any one of you if you guys ever want to come by. I'm right down the street at 5th and Lomas. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, we're back on the motion, which is to remand this to the FGO committee. Is there any discussion on that? Councilor Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to move to defer. I don't know if I'll get your support, but I certainly hope so. We have put a lot of work into this bill, made a lot of changes now that answers a lot of many of the things that have come up by the industry here in Albuquerque. We want to make this bill as good as we possibly can, as fair as we possibly can. So I am going to move for deferral. I'd still like to hear from APD.
So motion to deferral until when? November 6th? Or that's what we had?
1 month deferral.
So the second meeting in
Approximate.
November, and then the 20th. So there's that motion. You say you wanted to hear from APD now?
Yes, sir.
All right. You know, we're late in the evening, but how many people are going to speak from APD?
Good evening, Sergeant Will Doran with APD's Organized Crime Unit. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak tonight. I'll just take a few moments. I think we're missing a little bit of the spirit of the law on what we're trying to create here, and that's opening the lines of communication between law enforcement and our pawnbrokers and metal industry and jewelry buyers. One thing, when Counselor Gibson first approached APD investigative units about some of the property crime issues that her constituents were having, one of the ideas I proposed was to enhance our ordinance as it pertains to pawn shops. What I saw as the sergeant of property crimes unit is when we conduct inspections in the pawn shops, not getting full cooperation. Now, yes, we're held to the letter of the law of what the ordinance is, but that's why we wanted to strengthen the ordinance a little bit. When we conducted our inspections, we were denied access to places like gun vaults. We found numerous violations. So our goal isn't to close down pawn shops, it's to actually get them into compliance. We, on a weekly basis, get briefed on a who's who of property crime offenders, repeat offenders, that are utilizing pawn shops to convert stolen property from residential burglaries, commercial burglaries, auto burglaries, larcenies, and robberies, and converting them into cash. So that's a method that they use. By regulating the pawn industry and working cooperatively with APD, I think that will cut off an avenue of escape for our bad actors in this city. Now, we've heard from several pawn shops, and most pawn shops in the city do comply with APD, and we work very well together. But there are a few bad actors, and that's what we've talked about all along, that are not in compliance. One of them does the vast majority of the pawn business in this city. They need enhanced in regulations in order to work with us. And again, I just think it's very important that we keep these lines of communication open. When it comes to jewelry buyers, one thing that we talked about is they don't have serial numbers and stuff on their jewelry because they melt the items down. So we thought about creating like a link or an app or having monthly meetings so that we can exchange information, law enforcement directly to them. Another thing that I proposed is that we provide a list of maybe our 100 worst property crime offenders, and we provide them that information so that if they start coming into their businesses, yes, they have the right to refuse their business, but you know what, they can also give us that information. So-and-so has been coming in here a lot. We saw him as one of your top 100 property crime offenders in this city, and he comes into our store frequently. We want those lines of communication opened. We've tried this before with emails, an email exchange, and we didn't get much participation. So we're asking that there's an increased participation with the Albuquerque Police Department as far as exchanging information and working together. So that's one of the things that we want to see come out of this. And we'd like further assistance with our inspection process. And I would actually like to propose a list of people that shouldn't be allowed to pawn in the city because of their pawning or their property crime habits. So all of those reasons is why we're here. And that's the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish with this.
Well, thanks to you and your fellow officers for sticking around all night with us. And I just want to say, I don't think there's a single person up here who doesn't recognize a need. And we've also heard from pawnbrokers that talk about there's some bad actors as well. I've heard that same thing from the pawnbrokers, that they're bad actors. So I think we've got to be more strategic about how we deal with those bad actors and not overly burden the good actors.
And I see the issues with the fingerprints, but realize that there is an identity theft issue in the city, okay? So when they're just providing driver's licenses, it's not necessarily the person that they're providing the license of. So the fingerprints is a deterrent to that. It's a very important part of this bill that I would like to see kept in. Now, I understand the issues about the going cashless, okay? And that's something that myself and Councilor Gibson have discussed as well. And I think there's some room for negotiation on that. But let's not throw the whole thing out at this time. It's too important. We've put too much time and effort. The Albuquerque Police Department supports this bill.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Got Councilor Winter first, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. And I think what I'm hearing, I'm hearing the folks down here in the industry want to work with folks. I'm hearing APD wants to work with everybody. So I think we should at least give everybody time to get together and really work this thing out. And I think it's going to work. I think it still should be sent back because then it will give them more time to be able to work it through and in a committee setting. Thank you.
Councilor Lewis.
Sergeant, you shared a lot of great ideas here tonight. I saw a lot of the pawnbroker businesses that were shaking their heads, and so you really did. I mean, I think 5 or 6 excellent, incredible ideas, and I'm not sure if it was you, but I did. We did propose an alternative ordinance here, and I'm glad to continue to propose, I think, innovative ideas that solve problems that we've had for a long time, and so. But you also said how important it is that there's communication and that there's a lot of working together. And I think that we can. I think some of the pawnbroker and gold and silver owners have some of the best ideas. And my experience with them has been that they do have some incredible ideas. And I think they listen to the ideas like many of them that you just shared tonight. And they're common sense people that say, yes, that's going to work. And we want to work with you on that. So. And there is no doubt about the spirit and the intention of that. And I know this has come a lot. You all do incredible work, and you work hard and try to identify these problems. And there is never any doubt about the intent and the spirit of trying to fight crime and property crime in this city. And so, so I hope that's communicated just clearly in this discussion tonight too. I've offered some ideas and offered alternatives to this bill right here. And I hope that we can have that kind of a productive, not just discussion, but I mean really get some things done and put some things together that I think everybody would recognize that this is worth it. This is worth the changes. So thank you, Mr. President.
All right, there's a motion and a second for a deferral on Committee Substitute 050. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? No. All right, show of hands. All those in favor of deferral say yes. And raise your hand. Opposed? That fails
Mr. President?
on a 2-7.
Mr. President, make a motion to remand it back to the Finance and Government Committee to be heard and worked out together.
There's a motion and a second for the remand. All those in favor say yes. 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 Opposed? No. And that passes on an 8-1 vote. All right, we'll move on. We're going to have to suspend the rules once again. We do have 4 more bills, 2 of which are critical to be passed tonight. Councilor, so I'll move a suspension of the rules that we continue until 11. There's a motion, a second. All those in favor say yes. 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 Opposed? And that passes. Councilor Jones, Committee Substitute 051.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to move a do pass on Committee Substitute 051.
There's a motion second for a do pass on 051.
And then I would like to make a floor substitute for 051, and it is in your iPads.
There's a motion and a second to substitute 051, which is in your iPads. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? That passes on an 8-1 vote. There is one person signed up to speak, Tad Namiski.
Do you understand that that was already passed?
No.
Not yet?
Speak.
Thank you. Okay, would you give me overhead?
Overhead.
I'm going to show right here. City council, excuse me. Are you running my time off? Yeah, can you,
We can see the overhead. Please proceed.
I'm sorry?
Please proceed.
We see the overhead. Please proceed.
Okay, speak of pound gold buyers from the pound. Are you got a fingerprint? Fingerprint, Greg Gardonio?
Mr. Nemiski, we're not on the gold buyers
that's
bill.
my comment.
Speak to the bill.
Okay, now let's go to this bill. How much you gave me? 1.5 minutes?
Whatever's left on the clock.
Get screw, buster.
You're out of order, sir.
Let people cure it in Albuquerque.
You're out of order.
How respectful you are.
You're out of order, sir. Please be seated.
Get lost, buster. Crooked, corrupted.
All right, we're back on the bill.
You damn politician,
Counselor,
corrupted.
please,
That's right, I need a disc.
you've been warned, Mr. Nemiski.
Get lost, shut up.
All right, back on the bill, Counselor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll move a deferral until November 6th. As substituted.
There's a motion and a second for deferral on committee substitute 051. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? That passes. Counselor Jones.
Thank you, Mr.
052.
Thank you, Mr. President. On 052, I would like to move deferral to November 6th.
We need a motion on a due pass for that? Okay, move a deferral. There's a motion for deferral and due pass on 052. All those, until November 6th. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Opposed, and that passes. And now we're on Counselor Harris, R216.
Thank you, Mr. President. Move a due pass in R17216.
There's a motion and a second for a due pass on R216.
And I have an amendment. This will be floor amendment number, is there one sign up? I guess we'll do the amendment first, right? And then we'll hear from the proponents of the PID. Here's, if that's okay, Mr. President? Okay, there's amendment number 1. On page 13, lines 6 through 10, strike, to the extent that the purchaser of the district bonds offered in a private replacement is not a qualified institutional buyer, as the term is defined in Rule 144A of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the purchaser of the district bonds must be an accredited investor, as the term is defined in Rule 501 of Regulation D of the Securities and Exchange Commission.
All right, there's a motion and a second for amendment number 1 to R216. Any discussion? All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Yes. Opposed? And that passes. Back to the
And
bill.
I think we'll hear from Mr., I guess, Horowitz, just briefly. Given the late hour, we're probably going to appreciate very brief.
Sure, I'm happy to try to keep this under 2 minutes if I can. Mr. President, council members, Justin Horowitz with the Rohde firm, counsel to Eastside Development, the applicant in the matter before you. Appreciate the opportunity to brief you on the proposed public improvement district. Just by way of background, the applications move through the normal process, administrative process at the city, move through debt committee, move through the finance committee process of this council. We're here tonight now to ask the council to approve the formation resolution for the district. District, if formed, would encompass approximately 85 acres of land located in the southeast quadrant of the city. It's proposed to consist of, the land would, when developed, would consist of 331 residential lots. Currently, the land is undeveloped with no residents. My client, Eastside Development, is the sole owner of the land. Developers entered into purchase agreements with D.R. Horton and expects, for about half the lots, and expects to have a signed purchase contract with another national builder for the remaining portion of the lots. Districts formed for the primary purpose of reimbursing the developer for a portion of the public improvement costs used to develop the district. The district utilizes a special levy, which is imposed as a benefit assessment against the land for the property owners within the district. District then uses the proceeds of the special levy to reimburse the developer for a portion of the eligible PID costs. District does not utilize city revenues for any debt or operational purposes. The application projects cash flow from the special levy to result in about a $7 million bond issue with about $5.5 million of reimbursements to the developer. With that said, we note that the approval tonight would not serve as a bond authorization. Rather, any proposed debt issue would have to return to the council as well as debt committee for that approval. With that, I stand for any questions and appreciate your consideration of the matter.
Just a quick clarification. So the bond you're talking about, that's not the city's bonding authority or the city's fiscal funds, right?
Mr. President, Council Harris, that's correct. The Public Improvement District would issue its own special levy bonds. It does not go to the taxing authority or the general fund or any other credit of the city.
Okay, thank you. Urge your support.
There's a motion and a second for a due pass on R-216. All those in favor say yes.
Yes.
Opposed? And that passes.
Thank you.
The last item is R-248, the municipal elections to be held in Albuquerque on Tuesday, November 14th, 2014, and making a contingent appropriation of funds for the runoff election. I move a due pass. There's a motion and a second for a due pass. I move floor amendment number 1 to R-17-248. On page 1, lines 4 and 5, strike the language "and making a contingent appropriation of funds for the runoff election." This amendment removes the contingent appropriation from the title of the resolution. The contingent appropriation for the runoff was made in the final FY18 budget resolution. Move floor amendment number 1. There's a motion and a second. All those in favor say yes. Yes. Opposed? And that passes. And back on the bill as amended. All those in favor say yes. Opposed? And that passes. And there being no further business, this council meeting is adjourned.